Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Harryverse X. In today's episode, we explore, what if Hades and Persephone adopted Harry as their true son and Percy had to stop his brother from becoming god of death? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The boy the Underworld kept. The dead were never quiet in the Underworld, but they were rarely loud either. They shuffled and murmured, they wept softly at the banks of the Lethe or argued in low voices near the fields of asphodel, and the whole kingdom hummed with the particular kind of noise that grief makes when it becomes routine. Harry had grown up with that sound the way other children grew up with traffic or birdsong. It was simply the world breathing. He was 17 now, and he sat at the edge of the Styx with his boots off and his feet dangling over the black water, not touching it, never touching it, because even he wasn't stupid enough to dip his feet in the river of souls. The water moved like liquid obsidian, slow and deliberate, carrying something heavier than current. He watched it the way most people watch fire. There was always something new in it if you looked long enough. "You're going to fall in," said a voice behind him. "I've been sitting here since I was 6 without falling in," Harry said without turning around. "I think my record speaks for itself." Nico D'Angelo dropped down beside him on the rock, folding his legs underneath him with the easy grace of someone who'd spent too much time in cramped underground spaces. He was 16, dark-eyed and pale in the way that was specific to children of Hades, as if the sun had given up on them personally. He'd been living in the underworld for the better part of 2 years now, and in that time he and Harry had become the kind of friends who didn't need to explain silences. "Your father wants you," Nico said. "He always wants me. That's what fathers do. He wants you now." There's a difference in tone. Nico picked up a small black stone and turned it between his fingers. Something came through the veil. Harry looked at him then. "What kind of something?" "The kind that doesn't have a name yet." Nico tossed the stone into the Styx and they both watched it sink without a ripple. "He said to bring you immediately, which, knowing your father, means 5 minutes ago." Harry pulled his boots back on, lacing them with practiced efficiency. He was lean and quick, with dark hair that did whatever it wanted regardless of how he combed it and green eyes that caught the dim light of the underworld and held it longer than they should have. He wore a dark jacket over a simple shirt, both of which had been gifts from Persephone. She had very specific opinions about how her son should present himself, even in a kingdom where fashion was largely irrelevant to the deceased. At his belt, a short blade hung in a shadow-black sheath. The blade itself was made from solidified darkness, a gift from Hades on his 12th birthday, and it had a name Harry never used in public because it sounded ostentatious even to him. He stood, brushed off the back of his trousers, and looked out across the Styx one more time. Something was different in the water tonight. He couldn't name it. The current moved wrong, not backwards, but sideways, as if the river were trying to look somewhere it wasn't supposed to. "Right," he said. "Let's go." The palace of Hades was not the grim fortress of popular imagination. It had been, once, all black stone and cold fire and the kind of architecture that declared, "I am not trying to make you comfortable." But Persephone had been redecorating for centuries, and her influence had softened the edges in ways that Hades pretended to find objectionable and obviously didn't. The outer walls were still dark, still massive, still the kind of structure that made new arrivals to the underworld stop and feel the full weight of eternity. But inside, there were gardens in the corridors, impossible gardens of flowers that bloomed in darkness, pale asphodels and black roses and deep violet nightshade arranged with an artist's eye along the stone passages. The throne room had tapestries. Persephone had insisted. Hades had complained for approximately 1 decade before quietly commissioning a second set. Harry walked through the palace the way he'd walked through it his entire life, with the ease of someone who'd grown up in these halls, who'd chased Cerberus through the great corridor at age 8 and gotten a very measured lecture about respect for the symbolic guardians of the dead. He knew which stones creaked. He knew that the third door on the left past the treasury always stuck and you had to shoulder it. He knew that the garden in the east wing bloomed slightly brighter on the days when Persephone was happy and grew quiet and darker when she was worried. The garden was dark tonight. He walked faster. The throne room doors were open when he arrived, which was unusual. Hades held closed-door audiences with the dead and kept his private family matters even more private. Open doors meant either a display of power or a display of urgency, and the way the two guards flanking the entrance held their spears told Harry it was the latter. He walked in. His parents were both there, Hades standing by the great obsidian throne with his arms crossed, wearing that particular expression he used when information was annoying him, and Persephone beside him with one hand on his arm, which was the posture she used when she was both worried and making sure Hades didn't make a decision too quickly. Between them on the throne room floor, held down by nothing more than 3 thin threads of shadow, was an object that had absolutely no business being in the underworld. It was an envelope. Cream-colored, sealed with red wax, written in emerald green ink. Harry walked up to it and crouched to read the address. Mr. H. Potter Hades, the Prince's Chambers, the Palace of the Underworld, the Realm of the Dead. He stared at it for a moment. That's my name. Part of it, Hades said. His voice was what it always was, precise, unhurried, the kind of voice that had been delivering final judgments for millennia and had learned to strip out every unnecessary syllable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark robes that absorbed the throne room's low light. His hair was black and his eyes were a gray so deep they were almost colorless. Harry had his mother's eyes, Persephone's green, though that was more symbolic than genetic, given the circumstances of Harry's adoption, and Hades' bearing. The way Harry stood in a room, the quiet authority of it, was entirely his father's doing. It arrived through the veil approximately 1 hour ago. It passed through 3 layers of ward and settled on the floor as if it had every right to be here. It didn't trigger anything, Harry said, examining the seal without touching it. The wards would have unmade it if it carried malice. Correct. So someone sent a school letter through the land of the dead to find me specifically. Harry stood. That's either impressive or alarming. It's both, Persephone said. Her voice was warmer than Hades and always had been. She spoke the way spring arrived, quietly at first and then all at once. She was the most beautiful woman Harry had ever seen, and he was aware that this was a fairly objective assessment given that she was a goddess, but it wasn't the beauty he thought of first when he thought of her. It was the way she'd held him when he was small, when he'd woken from nightmares that he couldn't explain, a small boy with a scar on his forehead who sometimes cried without knowing why. She had sat with him in those moments with the patience of someone who understood that grief didn't always know its own source. She'd taught him to tend the dark garden. She'd been the first person to call him her son aloud, in the presence of gods, in a tone that dared anyone to argue. Nobody had argued. Harry, pick it up. He did. The wax seal broke cleanly and the letter inside unfolded itself. He read it in the throne room's pale light. It was an acceptance letter to something called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read it twice, which was not a habit he usually needed. He was a fast reader and generally retained information efficiently, but the letter was strange enough that he wanted to be sure he wasn't missing something. It told him he'd been accepted to a school of magic, that supplies could be purchased at a place called Diagon Alley, and that the Hogwarts Express departed from platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station on the 1st of September. It was signed by someone called Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. There's a mortal school sending me letters, Harry said. There is, Hades confirmed. A magic school. Evidently. Harry looked up. Did you know about this? About where I came from, I mean, the magic side of it. The look that passed between his parents was brief and specific. It was not the look of people who had been hiding something with intent to deceive. It was the look of people who had been waiting for a conversation and had not fully decided how to begin it. Persephone moved first, crossing the throne room floor and taking the letter gently from Harry's hands. She read it, and something moved across her face that wasn't quite sadness, more like recognition. We knew you were marked from the beginning, she said. When Hades brought you here, when we decided to keep you, you weren't just a child who had lost his parents. You were a child who had survived something that should have been unsurvivable. I was a baby, Harry said. You were, Hades said, and there was something in his voice now that he rarely let surface, something that sat just below the authority and the precision and the centuries of practice at being unmoved. You were 11 months old and you had a curse embedded in your soul that should have ended you 3 times over. It had already killed your parents. James and Lily Potter. He said their names carefully, the way he said all names, because in his kingdom, names were permanent things. They are in Elysium. They have been since the night you came to us. I want you to know that. Harry was quiet for a moment. He had always known, in the abstract way of knowing things that happened before memory, that he was adopted, that his parents were gods, his real parents, but that he had come from somewhere before. Hades and Persephone had never lied to him about it. They had simply answered the questions he asked and waited patiently for him to ask more. As a young child he had mostly asked about the underworld, about how things worked, about why the asphodel fields looked grey and could he please plant something colorful there, and the question of his mortal origins had sat quietly on a shelf in the back of his mind, something he'd look at eventually when he was ready. He looked at it now. A curse, he said. What kind? The killing curse, Hades said. A spell from the mortal magical world, green light, instant death, no counter-curse, no survivors on record. It was cast by a dark wizard named Voldemort who had been systematically eliminating a bloodline that opposed him. He came for your family specifically because of a prophecy. He paused. The curse rebounded. We believe it rebounded because your mother sacrificed herself for you, love as a magical ward, ancient and rarely invoked. The man who cast it was essentially unmade by his own spell. His soul was so damaged that it couldn't pass through the veil properly. It's still, fragmented. Scattered. The faintest expression of distaste crossed Hades' face. It has been an administrative inconvenience for some time. And the scar, Harry said, touching his forehead automatically. He'd had it as long as he could remember, a lightning bolt-shaped mark that sometimes itched at peculiar moments, when something passed through the veil, when the dead arrived in unusual numbers. He'd assumed it was a mark of death, some remnant of the world he'd come from. That's from the curse. We believe part of his soul attached to you when the curse rebounded, Persephone said. A fragment. It has been, contained, since you've lived here. The underworld's magic naturally suppresses it. But if you go to the mortal world, it might wake up, Harry said. It might attract attention, Hades corrected. From him, or from his followers. Voldemort's body was destroyed but his soul persisted. He has been attempting to reconstitute himself for 16 years. Something moved in Hades' grey eyes, cold, deliberate anger. He is not supposed to be alive. He is defying the natural order. That is not something I take lightly. Harry sat down on the steps that led up to the throne. It was an informal gesture, the kind that would have scandalized any visiting soul, but his parents had long since stopped expecting formality from him in private. He sat and he thought, which was something he was genuinely good at, not just the thinking itself but the doing nothing else while thinking, which most people found difficult. Why now, he said finally. Why is the letter arriving now? You came of age, Persephone said. In the magical world, a child's Hogwarts letter arrives at age 11. This letter is late. We believe the school's detection magic found you eventually, even here, because the magical signature in your blood is strong enough to be found anywhere. She knelt beside him, which she did sometimes because she was a goddess and had never felt the need to maintain artificial distance from her own son. There is a question in this letter, Harry. Whether you want to go to a school of magic for mortal children. You are partially mortal, she said. The magic in you is real and it is old and it has been growing your entire life whether or not you've been formally trained in it. You've been supplementing it with what you've learned here, shadow work, death magic, the older disciplines. But you have never used your mortal magic formally. She paused. And there is the matter of Voldemort. He is connected to you. He has been looking for a body for 16 years and he is getting closer to finding one. The magical world is not safe. But you ignoring it won't make it safer. Harry looked up at her. You want me to go? I want you to choose, she said, and the distinction, coming from her, was the most important one in the world. We will support you either way. But I think, she glanced at Hades, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I think you are always going to have to face the world that made you. The question is whether you face it prepared. He thought about the sticks and the way the water had moved wrong tonight. Sideways, as if looking somewhere it wasn't supposed to. When September? He asked. Nico, who had been standing near the door with the practiced invisibility of someone raised around ghosts, said, about 3 weeks. Harry stood up. All right. I'll need to visit my parents first. James and Lily. He said their names and felt them, not as an open wound, because he had been raised among the dead and death didn't frighten him, but as a fact with weight. They should probably know I'm going. Hades said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, it was with deliberate care. There is one more thing. Harry turned. Before you go to this school, before you walk into the mortal world openly, I am going to train you. Properly. 3 weeks is not long, but you are not starting from nothing. He uncrossed his arms and looked at his son with the direct regard of someone who did not soften things because he loved you, who, in fact, loved you more for not softening them. You are my son. You have been raised in the oldest kingdom in existence. You have access to power that no mortal child at any school has access to. I will not send you into the world half prepared and hope for the best. You never hope for the best, Harry said. I plan for everything, Hades corrected. And then hope is irrelevant. Harry almost smiled. 3 weeks. Then I go. The training was not symbolic. Hades was not a god who believed in symbolic gestures, he believed in efficiency and outcome, and his teaching method reflected this absolutely. He was patient in the way that glaciers were patient, he would wait as long as necessary for you to understand something, but he would not pretend you understood it before you did, and he would not reduce the difficulty of the thing to match your current level. He raised your level to match the thing. They worked in the deep training chambers beneath the palace, rooms that predated the palace itself, carved chambers of black stone where the walls absorbed sound and the floor was cold enough that you could feel it through your boots. Harry had spent time in these rooms as a child for different reasons, hide and seek, mostly, and once a disastrous experiment with shadow running that had gotten him stuck in the wall for 40 minutes before Nico had found him and they both agreed never to mention it to anyone. The first morning, Hades stood in the center of the chamber and watched Harry demonstrate his full range. Harry obliged without commentary, moving through it the way someone moves through a space they know thoroughly. Shadow travel, stepping into darkness and emerging from it elsewhere, a technique he'd been doing reliably since he was 10. Soul sense, the awareness of nearby death, the ability to feel the weight and proximity of departed souls, which in the mortal world would let him sense anyone recently dead or dying within a considerable radius. Shade summoning, calling up the shadows of the dead in temporary form, not the true souls themselves but the impressions they left. And the darker work, the ability to impose the weight of death on objects, to make living things feel the cold pull of mortality, to command the dead to stillness or movement with a gesture. He hadn't used that last ability on living things. There had never been reason to. Hades watched all of it and said, again, but this time don't use shadow travel as a dodge reflex. You're leaning on it. It's effective, Harry said. It's a crutch when used offensively. Move through the problem instead of stepping around it. Hades raised a hand and the chamber filled with animated stone soldiers, constructs of old magic, training opponents that hit back. Again. Harry fought them. He didn't shadow travel once. By the end he was breathing harder than usual and one of his sleeves was torn and he'd had to improvise with shade work twice in ways he hadn't tried before, which had produced unexpected but interesting results. Better, Hades said. In the evenings, Persephone worked with him on the mortal magic, because she had spent more time in the mortal world than anyone in the family, and because she had a facility with it that surprised people who expected a Death Queen's wife to have only death-adjacent skills. She was a goddess of spring and growing things, but she was also one of the oldest practitioners of what the mortals called magic, and she could recognize its patterns in Harry's blood like recognizing a familiar language. "Your instincts are there," she said, watching him practice wandless conjuring with focused intent. The candle across the room lit and guttered and lit again. "You've been doing magic your whole life without formalizing it. The wand will feel strange at first. Work with it rather than through it." "I've never used a wand." "I know. The technique is partly about the wand and partly about learning to let go of the control you've built up." She tilted her head, studying him. "Death magic requires absolute control. You hold everything. You're precise because you have to be. Mortal magic, at its best, requires you to let things move through you, not just be directed by you. It's a different relationship with power." "Sounds inefficient," Harry said. "It sounds human," she replied. "Which is partly the point." He went quiet at that. "Then, am I, still human?" "You were born human," she said. "You've been raised by gods. You carry death magic and mortal magic and a fragment of a dark soul in your scar, and you've spent 17 years in the most ancient kingdom in existence." She looked at him with the particular warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the kind of love that doesn't need conditions. "What you are is mine. The rest is context." He nodded once, roughly, and turned back to the candle. Nico came to train with him in the afternoons. That was less formal. Nico didn't take to formality on principle, and Harry had long since stopped expecting it, but it was in some ways the most useful preparation because Nico had spent time in the mortal world recently and knew things about it that Harry genuinely didn't. "There are other kids like us," Nico said one afternoon. They were running through shadow combat in the eastern gardens, ducking between the black rose hedges while shades of minor underworld servants darted at them. "Half-bloods. Children of Olympians. There's a camp for them." Harry sent a shade into the ground and watched two training opponents lose their footing. "I know about the demigods. Do you know about Camp Half-Blood specifically?" "My father mentioned it. It's on Long Island." He vaulted a low hedge without slowing down. "Athena's idea, I think. Maybe Chiron's." "Your brother trains there," Nico said. Harry stopped moving. Nico pulled up beside him, and they stood among the dark roses while the training shades dissolved back into the garden shadows. Their session automatically paused. "My brother," Harry said. "Half-brother. Technically." Nico was very carefully not making this a bigger deal than it was while also clearly thinking it was a big deal. "Percy Jackson. Son of Poseidon. He's about your age, older by a few months. He paused, seeming to sort through adjectives. "He's good. He's genuinely good. He's also loud and makes a lot of decisions with his heart instead of his head, and he once fell into Tartarus and came back, which you have to respect on a fundamental level." Harry was quiet for a moment. He knew about Percy Jackson the way he knew about most things of significance in the mortal divine world, through the Underworld's awareness of notable souls, through his father's occasional dry comments about Poseidon's son causing chaos in ways that eventually created paperwork for Hades. He knew the name. He'd known it for years. He hadn't thought about it in terms of brother. "Does he know about me?" Harry asked. "I don't think so," Nico said. "I mean, I haven't told him. And it's not like Hades puts out announcements." He paused. "I visit the camp sometimes." "I could, not yet," Harry said. He started walking again, slower now. "Let me get through the school year first. I'll deal with the camp and the demigods and the," he paused. "The brother. After." Nico fell into step beside him. "That's probably smart." "Probably." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Plans involving the children of sea gods don't tend to go according to schedule. That's just a thing that's true." Harry made a mental note. The visit to Elysium was on a grey Tuesday, 3 days before he left for the mortal world. He went alone, which Persephone had suggested and Hades had agreed to, because there are some conversations that only go the right way in private. Elysium was the most beautiful part of the underworld. This was not an accident, it was the reward, after all, and the beauty was real and earned rather than decorative. The fields were golden in the way sunlight was golden, which was remarkable given that actual sunlight never reached there, and the souls who lived in Elysium had a peace about them that was different from the flat contentment of asphodel. It was an active peace. The peace of people who had done something with their lives and knew it. He found his parents by the river that ran through the center of Elysium, because Nico had asked the records keeper and gotten their location in an act of quiet helpfulness that Harry appreciated enormously. They were sitting together, James and Lily Potter, and they looked like the people in the few photographs Harry had been shown. Young. Dark-haired, James, with round glasses and the same chaos of hair that Harry had inherited. Lily with red hair and green eyes that were, in fact, exactly Harry's eyes. He'd known this intellectually. Seeing it in person was different. They saw him at the same moment. Lily's hand went to her mouth. James stood up in one motion. Harry stopped a few feet away and tried to figure out what the right thing to say was, which he was usually better at than this. "Hello," he managed. Which was not his best opening. "Harry," Lily said, and the way she said it, like the word had been waiting a very long time to be said properly, undid something in his chest that he hadn't realized was wound tight. He crossed the distance. She put her arms around him. He let her, which surprised him a little. He wasn't, in general, someone who needed to be held. He'd had love enough from Persephone and comfort enough from the underworld to have grown up secure in ways that mattered, but this was different. This was the woman who had stood between him and a killing curse and chosen him absolutely. He found he had rather a lot of feelings about that. James put a hand on his shoulder, and Harry looked up at him. James was grinning, a slightly wet, thoroughly emotional grin, and he looked so much like someone's dad that Harry almost laughed. "You turned out well," James said. "Obviously. You had excellent parents." "I did," Harry agreed, and felt the double truth of it without conflict, because that was how he'd been raised, in a household where love wasn't a competition and truth wasn't a betrayal. They sat by the river and talked for 3 hours. He told them about growing up in the underworld, about Hades and Persephone, about Nico and the training and the letter. They told him about the wizarding world, about Hogwarts, about what to expect, about the friends they'd made and the war they'd fought and Voldemort's particular brand of evil. James described the marauders with the pride of someone who had never entirely grown up and knew it. Lily explained the nuances of spell theory with the precision of someone who had always been excellent at magic and took a certain satisfaction in the fact that her son would be too. "He'll come for you," Lily said, near the end. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who'd had 16 years to process their own death and had found a way to make peace with it. Voldemort. Whatever form he's managing to hold together right now. When he finds out you're in the mortal world, he'll come. "I know," Harry said. "He is afraid of very few things. Death is one of them." "A child who isn't afraid of death," she paused. "That will trouble him." "Good," Harry said, and meant it with a quietness that was more unsettling than heat would have been. Lily looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and touched the lightning bolt scar. He felt it, not pain, just awareness, the fragment in the scar stirring faintly at her touch and then settling. "Be careful with that," she said softly. "It's not just a scar. You know that." "I know." "And, Harry," she hesitated, then said it anyway. "Be careful with yourself. Not in the way of hiding. Just," she looked for words. "Don't disappear into the death of it. You were always alive too. Remember that." He thought about that for a long time on the walk back. The morning he left, the palace was quiet in the particular way of places holding their breath. He had one pack, his father's insistence on efficiency had made sure it was a good one, packed with things he needed rather than things he thought he needed, which were sometimes the same list and sometimes entirely different. His wand had been obtained through channels Hades would not fully explain but which Harry suspected involved either a Gringotts account that had existed in his name since birth or a direct conversation with Ollivander that no one would be discussing publicly. The wand was 11 inches, ancestral hair core, and when he'd held it for the first time in the training chamber the shadows in the room had moved without him asking them to. Persephone walked him to the boundary of the Underworld, to the edge of the passage that led up into the mortal world through the specific gateway in New York that Hades maintained for family use. She had a scarf. He did not know why she had brought a scarf because it was summer and he was going to Scotland eventually and she was a goddess, but she folded it and tucked it into the outer pocket of his pack with the matter-of-fact composure of someone who simply needed to give him something to carry with him and had selected a scarf. "Right," she said. "Mother. I will be going to a school. There will be owls. Then use an owl. Right. I'll write." She put both hands on his face, which she had been doing since he was small, and looked at him. He let her look. "You are going to be extraordinary," she said. "You always have been." "You're biased," he said. "Absolutely," she agreed. "Also correct." He hugged her, which he did not do performatively. He'd always been the kind of person who meant physical gestures when he made them. She was warm and smelled like something growing in dark soil, which was the specific scent of her that had always meant home to him. He held it for a moment. Then he turned to his father, who was standing a few paces back in the characteristic pose, arms at his sides, expression composed, everything about him communicating a god's dignity and absolutely nothing communicating the way his jaw had tightened when Harry had said goodbye at the palace door. "Father," Harry said. Hades said, "You know who you are." "I do. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Something moved in the colorless eyes. "You are my son. Whatever they know about Potter, whatever story they've built around your scar and your survival, you are mine first. Act accordingly." Harry felt that land. "I will. And if Voldemort's fragments make themselves known," Hades paused. "Inform me immediately. He has been avoiding the Underworld long enough." "The administrative inconvenience," Harry said. The faintest, most controlled almost smile. "Precisely." Harry picked up his pack. He looked at them both, at the king and queen of the dead who had heard the wailing of an infant soul at the edge of the veil and chosen, against every precedent, against the practical logic of running an afterlife, to keep him, and felt the particular fullness of 17 years of being completely, absolutely loved. "I'll be back for the winter," he said. "You'd better be," Persephone called after him. "Cerberus gets depressed when you're gone." He was smiling when he walked into the dark of the passage, and the dark welcomed him the way it always had, like a room he lived in, like a language he spoke natively, and then there was a moment of transition, a moment of between, and then the dim gray light of an overcast New York morning and the sound of traffic and the smell of exhaust and coffee, and the whole broad loud indifferent mortal world opening up in front of him. He stood in the shadow of a building near Central Park and looked at it all, the people moving in every direction, the noise and the color and the startling aliveness of it, so different from where he'd come from and yet not as foreign as he'd expected, because he had his mother's eyes and his father's bearing and 17 years of being prepared, and the world could not present him with something he would face with anything other than complete readiness. The scarf was in his pocket. His wand was at his wrist. Somewhere in this city, the son of Poseidon was living his life not knowing he had a brother. Somewhere in the mortal world, a fragmented dark soul was looking for a body. Somewhere above, Olympus was watching. Harry Potter, Prince of the Underworld, pulled up his collar against the New York wind and walked into the morning. Chapter 2, The Sea Meets the Shadow. The thing about Camp Half-Blood was that it always looked like controlled chaos from the outside and absolute chaos from the inside, and Percy Jackson had long since made peace with this. He was standing at the edge of the sparring field watching two Ares kids absolutely demolish each other with practice swords when Chiron trotted up behind him with the particular expression that meant something is happening that I haven't fully processed yet. Percy had learned to read Chiron's expressions the way sailors read weather, the earlier you caught the signs, the better your chances of not being surprised by something catastrophic. "We're expecting a visitor," Chiron said. "Okay," Percy said. One of the Ares kids took a hit to the shoulder and went down hard. The other one cheered. "What kind of visitor?" "The unusual kind." Percy turned to look at him. "Chiron. Everything that happens here is the unusual kind. You're going to need to be more specific." Chiron's expression did something complicated. He was a centaur of tremendous dignity and considerable age, and he had taught heroes since before most civilizations had names, which meant his baseline for what qualified as unusual was already calibrated several standard deviations above normal. The fact that he was using the word now with that particular expression was, itself, information. "He is a son of Hades," Chiron said. In a manner of speaking. Percy felt that in his stomach. "Nico? Nico's coming." "Not Nico. Someone else." Chiron looked toward the camp boundary, toward the hill where the golden fleece hung on the pine tree and the border shimmered faintly with the protective magic woven through it. "He requested permission to enter through proper channels, which I found refreshing. Most people who have access to unconventional entry methods use them without asking first." Percy looked at the hill. There was someone standing at the boundary. Even at distance, the figure read as different in a way Percy couldn't immediately articulate. It wasn't that the person looked threatening, they were just standing there, pack on their back, hands loose at their sides, but there was something about the way they stood, a quality of stillness that didn't match the nervous energy of a first-time visitor or the performative ease of someone trying too hard to look relaxed. It was the stillness of someone who was exactly where they intended to be and had decided to wait to be invited in rather than simply because they couldn't get in otherwise. That distinction registered somewhere in Percy's instincts, and his instincts had been keeping him alive since he was 12, so he paid attention to them. "Should I?" Percy started. "Yes," Chiron said. "Go meet him." Percy jogged across the field, past the archery range where Apollo campers were taking turns and someone had somehow managed to stick 3 arrows in the same target at once, past the amphitheater where a group of Demeter kids were doing something to the grass that Percy didn't look at long enough to understand, and up the hill toward the boundary. The visitor came into clearer focus as Percy got closer. His age, late teens, same as Percy. Dark hair, green eyes, wearing a dark jacket over a simple shirt that somehow looked deliberate rather than casual. There was a wand tucked at his wrist, which Percy clocked immediately as a magical object, and a blade at his belt that was the specific shade of black that meant it wasn't made of anything that grew in the mortal world. The scar on his forehead caught Percy's attention last, and only because it did something strange in the light. It seemed for just a moment like the air around it was slightly colder. "Percy Jackson," the visitor said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Percy said, stopping a few feet from the boundary's edge. The shimmer of the ward sat between them. "And you're Harry," he said. "Harry Potter." He paused. "I'm told we share a father's family, technically speaking. I thought I should introduce myself before someone else did it wrong." Percy stared at him. "Hades is my father, yes. Adopted. Properly, completely, and not a metaphor." Harry said this with the calm of someone stating a fact about weather. "He and Persephone raised me. I grew up in the underworld. I am told this is the part where people make faces." Percy was making a face. He was aware that he was making a face and he couldn't immediately stop. "Hades raised a kid." "He did. In the underworld. That's where he lives, yes. And you're fine. You're just," Percy gestured at him vaguely. "Normal." Something moved in the green eyes. Not offense, exactly, more like the assessment of someone recalibrating their estimate of a conversation. "Define normal." "Fair point," Percy said, because it was. He looked at Harry for another moment, then stepped back from the boundary. "Come in. The wards will let you through, Chiron cleared you." Harry stepped through the boundary and the camp's protective magic closed around him. Percy watched him do it. Most people felt the wards when they crossed and showed it somehow, a flinch or a pause or that particular face of mild surprise. Harry crossed through the same way he'd been standing outside, completely unbothered, as if the ancient magical boundary was simply a door and he was simply walking through it. That, too, registered in Percy's instincts. "You said you grew up in the Underworld," Percy said as they walked back down the hill. "All the time. All my life." Harry glanced at the camp, the cabins arranged in their horseshoe, the activity everywhere, the flags and the noise and the general sense of barely organized energy. He seemed genuinely curious rather than critical, which Percy appreciated. "I know it seems strange. It's not how I think of it. It's just home." "What's it like down there?" "Quieter than this." He watched an Ares kid body check a Hermes kid off the climbing wall and both of them land in a laughing heap. "Much quieter." Percy almost smiled. He was still working through the information. Hades had a son, an adopted son, a mortal adopted son who had been raised in the Underworld for 17 years, and the implications were stacking up in ways he'd need more time to sort through. But the person in front of him was, so far, providing no information that suggested danger, and Percy had learned to trust that instinct too. "Why are you here?" Percy asked. "At camp, specifically. I'm passing through New York on my way to London. I wanted to meet you before other things happen." Harry paused, and something shifted in his expression, a slight movement towards something careful. "Nico said I should. He also said you'd probably try to assess whether I was dangerous within the first 30 seconds. I gave you 45, Percy said. Generous. So. Are you? Harry looked at him directly. I could be, he said, without heat or threat, just the same quality of fact stating he'd been using since he arrived. Most people with significant power could be. I'm not here to be. He held Percy's gaze. I'm here because I have a half-brother I've never met, and I was raised by a woman who believes family should be acknowledged before circumstance forces the issue. He paused. She's usually right about things. Percy thought about his own mother, about how she had the same quality of quiet certainty about what mattered, and felt something in the conversation shift into a different register. All right, Percy said. Come meet Annabeth. Annabeth Chase's first response to Harry Potter was to look at him the way she looked at architectural problems she found interesting, with focused, slightly narrowed eyes and the expression of someone rapidly processing more information than they were visibly displaying. She did this for approximately 4 seconds before saying, the scar is a Horcrux fragment. Harry blinked. It was, Percy noted with some satisfaction, the first time he'd seen Harry's composure do anything unexpected. How do you know what a Horcrux is? Harry asked. I read, Annabeth said. Magical theory overlaps with divine theory in several areas. The magical world keeps better records on soul fragmentation magic than Olympus does, actually, which tells you something about both institutions. She tilted her head. The fragment in your scar, has it been suppressed? Since childhood, Harry said. The Underworld's ambient magic keeps it contained. But you're not in the Underworld right now. No. So it's, what, waking up? Slowly, Harry said. It's not a threat at this level. I've been trained to manage it. He paused, then asked, with what seemed like genuine interest, how did you identify it that fast? The air around your scar is approximately 3 degrees colder than everything else, Annabeth said. That's a soul fragment. Standard signature. She said this as if it were obvious, which, Percy reflected, to her it probably was. They were sitting at the picnic table outside the Poseidon cabin, which Percy had claimed for this meeting partly because it gave him home ground and partly because the Poseidon cabin always had the particular quality of space near water, the faint salt smell and the easy light, that made him think clearly. Harry sat across from him and Annabeth with his pack at his feet and his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that a Hephaestus kid had produced with the kind of casual magical efficiency that camp kids developed after years of improvising. You said you're going to London, Annabeth said. Hogwarts. September 1st. Harry took a drink of coffee. I should have started 6 years ago, technically. Late arrival. But you have other training. Extensive. Death magic. She said it without drama. Yes. What's your range? She asked, and Percy recognized the question. It was the same one she asked every new arrival who claimed significant power, the question that separated people who understood their own abilities from people who had an inflated idea of them. Harry was quiet for a moment. Not hesitating, thinking about how to answer accurately. Soul sense up to roughly a quarter mile in open space, more in confined areas where death is concentrated. Shadow travel limited to destinations I can visualize clearly, gets harder with distance past about 50 miles. Shade summoning indefinitely in terms of quantity, limited by precision the larger the number gets. Shade wait, he paused. That one I don't have a clean range on. It depends on what I'm applying it to. Shade wait? Percy asked. The feeling of death, Annabeth said before Harry could answer. The presence of mortality. The awareness that you are going to die. She looked at Harry. You can impose that on living things. On objects. I haven't used it on people. He met Annabeth's look evenly. I'm not going to use it on people unless someone makes that decision necessary. And your mortal magic, she pressed. Undertrained, he admitted. Powerful, my mother says, but not formalized. I've been doing wandless instinct work my whole life. The wand disciplines are new. He turned the wand at his wrist slightly, a small, easy movement, like showing them something rather than demonstrating it. The shadows under the table shifted fractionally. I'm working on the relationship. Annabeth looked at Percy. Percy looked at Annabeth. They had an entire conversation in 2 seconds in the way that people who have fought through Tartarus together sometimes could. Okay, Percy said. You should know some things. About what's been happening. Harry set down his coffee. Tell me. So Percy told him. He talked about the state of the divine world, about the ongoing power tensions on Olympus, about the way the boundaries between the mortal and divine kept thinning in ways that made everyone who paid attention nervous. He talked about the half-blood world, about camp and the Greek and Roman divisions and the ongoing effort to maintain something like cooperation between the two. He was straightforward about it. Percy had never been good at being anything other than straightforward, and Harry listened the way good listeners did, with his full attention and without interrupting except for specific clarifying questions that were, Percy noticed, always questions about structure and motivation rather than surface details. He's thinking about how things work, Percy thought. Not what they are. How and why they work. The demigod world and the magical world don't interact much, Harry said when Percy finished. Almost never. Different spheres. The gods don't really involve themselves with, Percy gestured loosely. The Voldemort situation. My father thinks otherwise, Harry said. He thinks Voldemort's defiance of natural death has created ripple effects in the Underworld for 16 years. He's been tracking it. He picked up the coffee again. There are more overlaps between these worlds than either side usually admits. Your father thinks a lot of things he doesn't share, Percy said, and there was enough edge in it that he heard it himself and didn't try to cover it. Harry heard it too. He didn't look defensive. He's not particularly forthcoming, he acknowledged. That's fair. He was more communicative with me than he is with most, but I understand that's not a universal experience. He looked at Percy steadily. I'm not here to represent my father's choices. I'm here as myself. Percy sat with that. The edge dissolved. Okay. Yeah. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not going to pretend I don't have complicated feelings about the entire Hades situation. But that's not on you. No, Harry said simply. It's not. There was a silence that was almost comfortable. Almost. Two people at the edge of something that might become trust, not quite there yet but not hostile either, circling the same territory from different directions. "Show me the camp," Harry said. "Properly. I'm here until tomorrow morning." Percy showed him the camp. It turned out to be one of the more interesting afternoons Percy had spent there, which was saying something given that his baseline for interesting afternoons had been permanently recalibrated by approximately 5 separate world-ending events. Harry moved through the camp with curiosity and confidence in equal measure, asking specific questions about training methods, looking genuinely interested in the forge and the armory, having a 15-minute conversation with the Athena cabin's head counselor about defensive ward theory that Percy understood about 40% of and Harry seemed to find genuinely engaging. At the climbing wall, Harry looked at the lava-running hazards for a moment, then looked at Percy. "Does it actually erupt?" he asked. "Yeah. Random intervals. It's a feature." "How often do people fall?" "Often enough that we keep a medic on standby." Percy watched him. "You want to try it?" "I want to see how the hazards work with shadow travel," Harry said. "The wall resets obstacles every run," Percy said. "The lava jets are pressure-triggered. If you step on, can you go with me?" Percy blinked. "What?" "I'd learn more watching you run it and working around your technique than running it alone." He said it with the directness of someone stating a tactical reality, not making a social request. "You've done it hundreds of times. I haven't done it once. Running it together tells me more." Percy thought for about half a second. "Sure." He looked at Annabeth, who had been following them through the camp and listening to everything with the expression she used when she was building a comprehensive model of something in her head. "Time us." She pulled out her watch. "Ready when you are." They ran it together. It was, Percy would think about this later, would come back to it, it was one of those experiences that told you more about someone than hours of conversation. Harry was fast and completely unafraid, and when the first lava jet fired he shadow-traveled 4 feet sideways without breaking stride, landed in a run, and kept going. When a section of wall collapsed, a new feature Percy hadn't seen before, probably Hephaestus kids doing maintenance, Harry went through the shadow it cast rather than around it, emerging on the other side already in motion. Percy found himself working with the other person rather than just alongside them. He'd pull water from the misting system to cool a jet before Harry had to dodge it, and Harry would shadow the ground under Percy when a section crumbled, giving him something solid to land on. They hadn't discussed this. They hadn't planned it. It just happened, the way two people who understand tactics sometimes find each other's rhythms without negotiation. They hit the top 11 seconds faster than Percy's personal record. Annabeth looked at her watch and then at them. "You've never trained together." "No," Harry said, breathing slightly faster but otherwise composed. "That time suggests you should." She looked at Percy with a very specific expression he knew well, the one that meant "I am updating several models simultaneously." That was almost scary. Percy looked at Harry. Harry looked at Percy. Something shifted, small but real, the particular thing that happens between people who have just discovered they work well together when it matters. "Dinner," Percy said. "You should stay for dinner." "I was going to," Harry said. "I was waiting for you to ask." Dinner at Camp Half-Blood was controlled chaos elevated to something close to an art form. Harry sat at the Hades table, there wasn't really one, but one materialized when he sat down, which the camp treated with remarkable equanimity because the camp had long since normalized remarkable things, and Percy ate at the Poseidon table, which was close enough that they continued talking across the space in the comfortable way of people who'd developed a conversational rhythm and weren't ready to stop it. Nico arrived at dinner like a shadow filling a space that had been left for it. He dropped into the seat next to Harry with a nod that communicated "I see you've met him" without using words, and Harry's expression shifted into something warmer and more relaxed than anything Percy had seen from him all day. "I notice you're both alive," Nico said. "Marginally," Percy said. "He ran the lava wall," Annabeth reported. "First try. Without falling." Nico looked at Harry. Did you shadow step through the collapse section? Obviously. Obviously, Nico echoed, and there was a shared language there that Percy recognized as the product of years of knowing someone, the shorthand of close friendship, and he filed it away as information. Harry was easy with Nico, easy in a way he wasn't quite easy with Percy yet, which was fine. That was how trust worked. It had a pace. Later, when the fire was going in the amphitheater and the camp had settled into its evening noise, Percy found himself sitting beside Harry at the edge of the fire circle, both of them watching the flames while conversation moved around them. "Can I ask you something?" Percy said. "Yes." "What's it actually like? Growing up there?" Percy looked at the fire rather than at Harry. "In the Underworld. Not the official version, what's it actually like?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "Dark," he said. "But not the way people mean when they say dark to mean bad. It's dark the way night is dark, it's a quality of the place, not a judgment on it. There's light in the palace, in the gardens. My mother grows things that shouldn't be able to grow without sunlight and they grow anyway because she wants them to." He paused. It's very permanent. Everything there is permanent. The dead aren't going anywhere. The structure of the kingdom has been the same for thousands of years. There's a solidity to it." He looked at the fire. "I didn't realize how loud the mortal world was until I was standing in New York this morning. Does it bother you?" "No. It's interesting." He glanced at Percy. People think the dead are sad. Some of them are. But mostly they're just people who have finished something. The ones in Elysium, especially, there's a quality to them. They made choices, they paid costs, and they know what their lives meant. There's no uncertainty left in them." He said it the way someone says something they've thought about for a long time. I found it instructive. Growing up around people who had already answered all the questions. Percy thought about that. About the weight of being surrounded by that kind of finality, not as horror but as education. About what it would do to a person to grow up knowing that lives had weight, that choices mattered, that everything added up to something in the end. "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm afraid of some things," Harry said. "What?" Harry considered. "Losing the people I love," he said. "That's the only one that feels real." Percy nodded slowly. The fire popped and sent sparks up into the dark. "Yeah," he said. "That's the only one that matters." They sat in silence for a while. It was the kind of silence that had stopped being uncomfortable somewhere in the previous hour and had become something else entirely, the silence between people who might, given time and circumstance, become something worth being. The trouble arrived at about 10 o'clock. It came in the form of one of the camp's magical sensors going off, a small alarm system along the northern boundary that Percy had helped install after an incident 2 years ago that nobody liked to discuss in detail. It wasn't an attack alarm. It was the other one. The one that meant something from a divine source was moving through the camp's territory without being stopped by the wards. Because it was divine. Percy was on his feet before the second ping. Harry was on his feet at the same time, and Percy noticed he hadn't needed a second ping either. They moved through the camp together, and Percy had the immediate practical thought that having someone who could navigate by death sense rather than just physical awareness was genuinely useful as they moved through the trees toward the northern boundary. Harry moved without needing to think about it, not shadow traveling, just moving through the dark with the ease of someone who'd grown up in it. The thing at the boundary was a shade. Not a full soul, not a person. A shade, the kind that formed when something significant died without completing its passage to the underworld. It hovered at the tree line, formless and gray, and it was pulling at the ward fabric with a directional intention that was almost like pointing. Harry stopped. He looked at it for a long moment. "What is it?" Percy asked. "It's a message." Harry stepped closer to the boundary. The shade oriented toward him, recognizing him. Percy realized, the way lost things recognize north. Something died nearby. Something that should have passed through properly and didn't. He reached out, not touching the shade but drawing close enough that the cold of it was visible in the faint misting of his breath. It's been redirected. Redirected how? That's the question. He straightened. His expression had changed, the curiosity was still there but underneath it something had sharpened. Souls don't redirect themselves. The flow of death has a direction. Intervention. He looked at Percy. Something is moving dead souls away from their proper destination. Something or someone. Both are concerning. He turned back to the shade, and it dissipated as he watched it, the message delivered, its purpose complete. The boundary was quiet again. But this wasn't random. It came here. He looked at Percy. It came to me. Percy held his gaze. What does that mean? It means whatever is moving the dead knew where I was and wanted me to know about it. Harry's voice was level, but underneath it there was something new, a tension that hadn't been there at the top of the climbing wall or sitting by the fire. Something that was starting to look like the edge of something much larger. It's been happening for a while, I think. This isn't the first. He looked at his own hands briefly. I've been feeling something wrong in the soul sense since I arrived in New York. I thought it was adjustment to being in the mortal world. It's not. Percy looked at the tree lean where the shade had been. The night was ordinary again. Stars, trees, the distant sound of camp settling into curfew. You need to go to London, Percy said. I do. Harry picked up the thread of something in his own thinking and Percy could almost see him following it. But before I do, Percy. If something happens while I'm there. If the dead go quiet in ways they shouldn't, or if the underworld reports anomalies, I'll know, Percy said. Through my father's networks if nothing else. Contact Nico first. He can reach me faster. A pause. Anne, I know this is strange, all of this. I know we met 6 hours ago. We ran the lava wall in under 2 minutes, Percy said. That's practically a blood oath in camp terms. Something close to a genuine smile. It changed Harry's face, made it warmer, less composed in the careful way of someone who'd been raised around the permanently dead. Made him look, Percy thought, like someone who had learned to be careful with his warmth but was offering some of it anyway. All right, Harry said. Owls are weird, Percy said. Use the camp communication system. Annabeth set up a mirror network. I'll use the mirror. And Harry, Percy held the other boy's gaze. Whatever's out there moving the dead around, it doesn't feel like something new to you. You've been feeling it since New York. That means, it's been watching me, Harry said quietly. Since before I left the underworld. Yes. The truth of that sat between them, neither of them making it smaller than it was. Be careful, Percy said. Harry looked at him with those green eyes that caught light they weren't given, and said, I'm not afraid of what's watching me. He picked up his pack from where he'd set it by the trees. But I'm taking it seriously. He left camp just after midnight, at his own request, shadow traveling to the New York gateway with Nico to see him off. Percy stood at the top of the hill and watched the dark where they'd been until there was nothing left to watch. Annabeth appeared beside him. She had a habit of appearing in spaces without making noise, which Percy had long since stopped finding startling. What do you think? She said. Percy thought about the climbing wall and the fire and the shade at the boundary and the way Harry had said I'm afraid of losing the people I love with the quiet certainty of someone stating something they'd already examined from every angle. He thought about the way Harry had looked at the camp, curious, not wistful, but something close to it. The look of someone who'd grown up in a kingdom of endings and was only now walking towards something that might be a beginning. I think something is coming, Percy said. And I think whatever it is has been pointed at him for a long time. Annabeth looked at the dark tree lean. The dead going missing. The shade that found him here, specifically. Yeah. That's not random, she said. No. Percy turned back toward the camp, toward the lights and the fire and the sound of the living. It's a pattern. We should dig into it. Before it becomes a crisis. It's already a crisis, Percy said. It just hasn't arrived yet. Annabeth took his hand without comment, which was the specific thing she did when she agreed with something she'd hoped he was wrong about. They walked back down the hill together. In the Underworld, 3 days later, Hades stood in the middle of his throne room with his hands behind his back and looked at the spot where the shade had reported from before dissolving back into the ambient dark of the kingdom. His expression was the one he used when a problem was presenting itself that he had already considered in theory and was not happy to see in practice. Persephone stood beside him, her hand not on his arm this time but at her side, slightly closed. "It's moving them," she said. "Yes," Hades said. "Where?" A pause. "Nowhere," he said. "That's the problem." He turned to look at her. "They are not going to Elysium. Not to Asphodel. Not to Tartarus. Not to Elysium's worse end. They are going to no destination in my kingdom at all." He said it with the contained fury of a god whose domain was being violated in its most fundamental principle. Souls are being removed from the natural flow of death entirely. "Contained," Persephone said. "Stored." The word cost him something to say. "For a purpose." Persephone was very still. And the shade that went to Harry came from the cluster of missing souls. Something with access to those souls sent it. He looked at the throne room door, toward the passage that led up and out into the mortal world. "Something that knows where my son is." "Hades." "I know," he said. "It's not a coincidence that it started when Harry came of age," she said. "No." He turned back to the throne. "Nothing about this is coincidental." He sat, which he rarely did with the deliberate heaviness of someone who needed the solidity of it beneath them. "I have been wrong," he said, which was also something he rarely did, and which Persephone received without surprise and without exaggeration. "I prepared him for the world. I did not prepare him for the possibility that the world had been waiting for him specifically." He looked at his hands. "I prepared him as a son. I should have also prepared him as a target." Persephone sat beside him on the steps, not the throne, the way Harry sometimes sat, and Hades registered this and said nothing because some echoes were welcome. "He's not easy to make into a target," she said. "He's not easy to make into anything he doesn't choose to be." "That is precisely what worries me," Hades said quietly. Outside the palace, the Styx moved in its sideways, wrong direction current, and the souls in Asphodel went on with their permanent, ordinary existence, and somewhere in the deeps of the kingdom, in places that didn't appear on any map of the Underworld, something was accumulating. Gathering. Waiting. It had been patient for a very long time. It could be patient a little longer. Chapter 3, The door that shouldn't open. Hogwarts was not what Harry had expected, which was interesting because he had expected quite a lot. He'd done his research. Persephone believed in research the way she believed in proper footwear, as a baseline requirement before undertaking anything significant, and he'd arrived at King's Cross knowing about the castle, the 4 houses, the general structure of magical education, the political landscape of the wizarding world post-Voldemort. He knew the broad strokes of his own legend there, the story they told about the boy who lived, the infant who'd survived the unsurvivable curse. He knew people would recognize his name and his scar. He knew the first weeks would involve a particular kind of social navigation that had nothing to do with magic. What he hadn't expected was the castle itself. He'd grown up in a palace that predated civilization, a structure of black stone and impossible gardens and corridors that went on longer than physics suggested they should. He thought he had a reasonably calibrated sense of what old architecture felt like, the specific weight of a building that had been standing long enough to develop something close to its own will. Hogwarts had that weight. It had it differently than the Underworld, warmer, more chaotic, the weight of a place that had been used by the living for centuries rather than the weight of a place built for permanence. The castle moved, he discovered on the first morning, shifting staircases and redirecting passages with no apparent logic. He found this delightful. The underworld never moved. The underworld had long since settled into itself and wasn't interested in surprises. He'd been sorted into Slytherin, which surprised nobody who had been paying any attention and which produced a complex social situation he navigated by doing what he always did when social situations were complex, being himself with complete consistency until people calibrated to it. By the end of the first week, the Slytherin common room had reached a tentative and slightly wary equilibrium with the new student who had arrived late, seemed entirely unbothered by the common room's usual social hierarchies, and had once, casually, during a conversation about Quidditch that Harry had been only half following, let the shadows in the corner of the room shift into the rough shape of a dragon without looking up from his book. "Did you do that on purpose?" his dormitory mate Blaise Zabini had asked, watching the shadow dragon dissipate. "The dragon? No, that was idle." Harry had turned a page. "Sorry." "Don't be," Blaise had said, after a pause. It was brilliant. The coursework was interesting in the way that learning any new language was interesting. The underlying logic of wand-based magic was genuinely different from what he'd been doing his whole life, and mapping the correspondence between the two systems occupied the part of his mind that liked structural problems. He was good at defense against the dark arts immediately, which his teacher Professor Caro seemed to find both impressive and slightly uncomfortable, and he was better at potions than anyone expected him to be, which he attributed to having spent his formative years in a kingdom where the properties of things that were dead or dying were well documented and practically applied. Herbology was his best subject. This surprised him too until he realized it shouldn't have. His mother's influence was everywhere in that subject, the way living things responded to attention and intention, the way growth could be coaxed from places that seemed inhospitable. He could make things grow in the greenhouses by sitting near them. He didn't tell Professor Sprout this. He just sat near the difficult ones. He wrote to Percy in the second week. Short messages, practical, the mirror network that Annabeth had built was responsive and clean, and Percy's replies had the quality of his conversation, direct, occasionally funny, honest about uncertainty in a way Harry found refreshing after a childhood around beings who rarely admitted to it. Percy told him about camp, about small strange things, a minor disruption near the Long Island shore, a dream that two different Poseidon campers had reported about dark water. Nothing definitive. Just the accumulation of small wrongnesses that preceded large ones. Harry told Percy about the scar. That it had been more active since arriving in Britain. Not painful, it had never been painful since the underworld's ambient magic had suppressed Voldemort's fragment during his childhood, but awake in a way it hadn't been before. Aware. As if something nearby was noticing it. He kept that information tightly held. Told Nico via a separate channel. Didn't mention it to his housemates or his teachers. The first incident happened on a Thursday in October. He was in the library, which he'd been using as his default evening location, less because he needed the resources and more because the library at Hogwarts was old enough to have a specific kind of atmospheric weight that he found conducive to thinking. He was sitting with 3 open books on comparative magical theory and a 4th on wizarding history, and he was doing what Persephone called his processing phase, which apparently involved staring at a mid-distance point while his mind worked through something. He felt the soul go. That was the only way to describe it. He'd had soul sense his entire life, the awareness of nearby death, the ability to feel the weight of departed souls. In the underworld it was like hearing background music, constant and ambient. In the mortal world it was quieter, a hum beneath ordinary sensory experience, present but subdued. He'd learned to tune it to what was relevant and let the rest sit below conscious attention. This was not below conscious attention. A soul, a living person's soul, which had a different quality from the dead, a warmth and forward motion that the dead didn't have, had simply stopped. That happened. People died. The feeling was the familiar one of a flame going out, a specific and final extinguishing. But then the soul didn't go anywhere. It hung in his awareness for 1 second, 2, 5, and then it was gone. Not passed through. Not departed. Gone, the way things went when they were removed from a system rather than moving through it. Like a file deleted rather than archived. Harry had the books closed and his pack on his shoulder before the next breath. He moved through the castle with his soul sense spread wide, following the direction the soul had been in when he felt it. Third floor, northeast corridor, near the abandoned charms classroom that everyone called the ghost room because it had an unusually high density of resident ghosts due to something that had happened in 1842 that nobody had fully explained. He found the room empty. Or mostly empty. In the center of the floor, where the cold stone held the memory of things better than walls did, there was a mark. Not a visible mark, his eyes told him the floor was clear. But his death sense told him differently, told him the stone was recording the echo of something that had stood here and pulled, the way a drain recorded the direction water had gone even after the water was long gone. He crouched and put his palm flat on the floor without touching it, hovering just above the cold stone, feeling the echo. Death. Not natural death. Not the death of a body failing or a heart stopping through ordinary cause. This was extracted death, surgical, deliberate, the death equivalent of a wound made by something that knew exactly where to cut. He stood. He looked at the door to the corridor and at the window above and at the ceiling above that, feeling for the direction the extracted soul had been moved. Up. Not up like above him in the castle. Up like a direction that only made sense to his particular awareness, a metaphysical up, the direction of souls being drawn towards something that should have been a destination but felt instead like a container. He pulled out his mirror and contacted Nico. "It's happening here," he said when Nico's face appeared in the surface. "At Hogwarts. A soul was taken from a living person tonight." Nico sat up from whatever he'd been doing. Taken as in, removed from a living body. Person's dead. Soul didn't pass through. He kept his voice even. Practical. Someone on these grounds has the capacity to extract souls from living people and redirect them. A pause. Harry. That's, Dementor adjacent. I know. He looked at the floor mark. Except Dementors consume. This was stored. The soul went somewhere intact. He breathed. Nico. I felt my own power in the echo. The silence from the mirror was specific. What do you mean? The method used. The signature of it. It reads like death magic. My kind. He kept his voice steady because being unsteady about it wouldn't help him understand it faster. It's not mine, I didn't do this. But it was done with something that resembles my power closely enough that I'd have to prove the difference. Nico's face was doing something careful. Someone is using magic that looks like yours. Yes. To kill people and store their souls. Yes. Another pause. Your father needs to know. I know. But first I need to find out who died. He straightened and walked out of the ghost room into the corridor. Someone in this castle lost their soul tonight and I need to find the body before anyone else does, because if the Hogwarts staff finds a soulless corpse and I'm the new student who showed up late with no explained history and obvious darkness-adjacent magic, that's a problem, Nico said. That's a significant problem. He was already moving. I'll contact you when I know more. The body was in a broom cupboard on the same floor, which suggested the soul had been taken first and the body relocated afterward. The victim was a fourth-year Hufflepuff named Martin Finch. Harry knew him by sight, a quiet boy with sandy hair who'd smiled at him in the Great Hall once when Harry had been sitting alone. He was not visibly injured. He looked like he'd simply stopped, which was exactly what had happened, except the thing that stopped wasn't his heart first. It was everything that made the heart worth beating. Harry checked for pulse reflexively, confirmed the absence, and then straightened and thought very quickly and very specifically. He could feel the remaining echo of his own style magic in the air around the body. Stronger here than in the ghost room. If a teacher with magical sensing ability came in here before Harry could do something about it, the signature would point at him with more clarity than he was comfortable with. He could clear the echo. He had the ability, it was his type of magic, and he understood it well enough to remove its traces from a space. But clearing evidence from a crime scene was its own kind of problem. He could leave it and deal with the accusation on its own terms, which he was prepared to do but which would create delays in finding the actual source. Or he put his hand out over the body, not touching it, and read the echo as carefully and completely as he could. Every detail. The specific application, the direction, the rate of extraction, the containment method used. He pressed it into his memory with the precision his father had trained into him. Hades kept records of everything and had passed this discipline to his son as a matter of course. Then he closed his eyes and read the soul's absence for the destination echo. Up. The same up. The same container. He could feel it now, with the amplification of proximity. It wasn't here in the castle. It was outside, somewhere in the grounds, or below them, or in a space adjacent to both that wasn't quite mortal world geography. A space between. He committed the direction to memory. Then he walked to the nearest ghost, nearly headless Nick, who was drifting along the fourth-floor corridor with the expression of mild melancholy that was his natural resting face, and said, "Sir Nicholas. I need you to find the headmistress. Don't tell her I sent you. Just tell her there's something in the cupboard near the ghost room that requires her attention." Nick looked at him with the sharp, interested eyes that most Hogwarts ghosts had, the tendency toward watchfulness that came from existing in a castle full of events for centuries. "May I ask why a student is dead?" Harry said quietly. "He deserves proper attention faster than I can arrange it without making myself the suspect. Please." Nick floated away. Harry went back to his dormitory, sat on his bed, and opened the mirror again. "Tell my father," he said to Nico. "Tell him specifically about the directional echo. The container signature." He paused. "And tell him I found my own power's fingerprints at the scene." "He's not going to like that," Nico said. "No," Harry agreed. "He's going to like it significantly less than that." Hades' response came through the mirror in the form of a message delivered by a shade that materialized in Harry's dormitory at 2 in the morning, which would have terrified any of his dormitory mates if they'd been awake to see it. The shade carried a spoken message in his father's precise cadence: "I know. It is not you. The container signature matches something old. Investigate carefully. Do not confront what you find alone. Your mother says to eat." The postscript made Harry exhale through his nose. He lay back on his bed and looked at the ceiling. The castle settled around him, its old stones making the small sounds that old stones made at night, and somewhere in it a fourth-year boy's body lay waiting for the people who were supposed to look after the living to come and account for the dead. Harry felt that, the specific weight of an unrecovered soul, the incompleteness of it, and felt it as something personal in a way that went beyond training or discipline. He did not sleep much that night. He spent the hours until morning doing what Hades had taught him to do with problems that didn't have immediate solutions: map the known information with absolute precision, identify the gaps, and prioritize the gaps by importance rather than by urgency. The gap that kept surfacing at the top of the list was the simplest and most troubling one. The magic at the scene looked like his. Not coincidentally like his, not in the vague sense of sharing a school of magic. Specifically like his. The application, the signature, the method. Which meant one of two things. Either someone had observed him using death magic closely enough and recently enough to replicate its specific signature, which was possible but pointed towards someone with access and ability beyond what Hogwarts generally contained. Or someone had built the method from a template. From a source that predated Harry's arrival at Hogwarts. From something that knew what Harry's magic looked like before Harry had used it here at all. He sat up in the dark. The souls had been disappearing since before he left the Underworld. The shade that found him at Camp Half-Blood had come from the cluster of missing souls. The cluster of missing souls had been moving before Harry entered the mortal world. Whatever was doing this had been using a version of Harry's power signature before Harry was in the mortal world to observe. Which meant it wasn't imitating him. It was imitating what he was supposed to become. He got up, dressed, and went to the library. Not for research, He knew what he was looking for in a theoretical sense now, and the Hogwarts library was unlikely to have the sources he needed for this particular inquiry. He went because the library was where he went to think, and he needed the weight of old books around him while his mind worked through something that was, he was beginning to understand, significantly larger than a series of missing souls. Someone had built a version of his future power and was already using it. Which meant someone had seen his future power in enough detail to model it. Which meant the soul extractions, the container, the fingerprinting of his magic at crime scenes, all of it, was not a random pattern of events. It was a preparation. A demonstration. An audition. For what role, he didn't know yet. But the shape of it was clarifying, and the clarity was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the November air coming through the library's stone walls. The investigation that followed was conducted over 3 weeks, quietly and efficiently, which were the only 2 speeds Harry had for investigations. He had advantages the Hogwarts staff didn't. His soul sense could track the echo of extracted souls in a way no conventional magical detection could, and his familiarity with death magic meant he could read its signatures the way a linguist reads dialects, not just identifying the language but the region, the era, the specific speakers. He found 3 more sites. A courtyard near the astronomy tower where a 5th-year Ravenclaw had been found in a catatonic state that the school healer called a severe magical shock but which Harry's senses told him was the result of a partial extraction. The soul hadn't been fully removed, just tasted. A corridor near the dungeons where the echo was strongest and most recent. And, most troubling, the Forbidden Forest, where the extraction signature was embedded in a clearing deep enough that students weren't supposed to go and old enough that the trees had grown around it, which suggested this particular site predated Harry's arrival by years. The Forbidden Forest site stopped him cold. He stood in the clearing in mid-November with frost on the ground and his breath misting in the still air, and he read the echo in the trees and the soil and the specific way the life of this place had been drawn on, and what he found was this: the method had been used here repeatedly, over a period of what his sense estimated as 3 to 5 years. But the technique was cruder here. Unrefined. The older the echo, the less precise, and the newer the echo, the more it resembled Harry's specific signature. It had been learning. Refining its technique toward a target expression. Toward him. He contacted Percy that evening. Percy's face in the mirror had the particular expression Harry had come to associate with him receiving information he'd hoped not to receive. 3 to 5 years, Percy said. Minimum, Harry said. The forest site could go back further. So it started before you left the Underworld. Long before. Harry looked at his notes, physical notes, written in the cipher his father had taught him as a child, habit and caution being the same thing when they'd been trained in together. Percy. The souls in the container, my father's been trying to locate them. He can feel their absence in the Underworld's accounting but he can't find the container itself. It's somewhere it's not in any realm he has jurisdiction over. Percy was quiet for a moment. Between realms. Yes. There are spaces between, Percy said slowly. Places that belong to neither Olympus nor the Underworld nor the mortal world. The spaces between divine territories. Primordial spaces. He paused. My dad has mentioned them. He doesn't like to think about them. Why not? Because the things that live in primordial spaces are older than the Olympians, Percy said. And they have their own agendas. Harry wrote primordial in the cipher and drew a line connecting it to audition and stared at the connecting line. Percy. What would happen, theoretically, if someone wanted to create a god of death? Not Hades. Not Thanatos. Something new. Something absolute. Percy's expression went very still. What do you mean, create? Hades governs the dead. Thanatos is the personification of death as a force. But they're both gods with domains and limitations and the Olympian structure around them. Harry said it carefully, the way you said something when you were still confirming it to yourself as well as stating it. A god of death with no such limitations, one who governed death itself rather than just the dead, that would be, the most powerful divine being in existence, Percy said flatly. More powerful than Zeus. More powerful than anyone. Yes. Harry. I know. The soul extractions. The refinement of technique toward your signature. The container building toward something, someone is collecting the raw material of death, Harry said. Souls. Power. And they're doing it using a version of my power as the tool. He looked at his notes. Which means they intend for me to be the vessel. Percy exhaled slowly. For what purpose? Who benefits from a god of death? That's what I don't know yet. Harry closed the notes. But whoever it is has been building toward this for years, which means they're patient and they're serious. And they've specifically chosen me, which means they believe I'm either the only option or the best one. Can you, Harry, can you feel it? Whatever is building toward this? Does it have a presence? Harry thought about the sideways current in the sticks on the last night before he left. He thought about the shade at Camp Half-Blood's boundary. He thought about the echo in the forest and the precision with which the technique had been evolving toward him. Yes, he said. I've been feeling it since before I left home. I think I've always been feeling it, and I thought it was just the Underworld's ambient awareness. He paused. It's not. What does it feel like? Harry thought about how to say it accurately. It feels like being studied, he said. By something that knows me very well. Better than a stranger could. It feels like, he stopped. What? It feels like being loved, Harry said. In a way that's very wrong. Percy said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it got when he was being honest about something that cost him something. I'm coming to you. Percy, I'm not asking. I'm telling you. No heat in it, just the flat certainty of someone who had made a decision. You're alone in a castle where people are dying with your power's fingerprints at the scene, and something has been building toward making you into a god, and I am not going to sit at camp writing mirror messages while that develops. A pause. We're brothers. That means something to me even if we've known each other for 2 months. Harry was quiet. He looked at the desk, at the cipher notes, at the small photograph of Persephone's garden he'd brought with him and pinned to the wall above his bed. It means something to me too, he said. But Percy, you walking into Hogwarts isn't subtle. I don't do subtle. I know. That's why I'm saying it. I also don't do waiting while my brother is a target. Percy's voice had the specific quality of someone who had been through enough that they no longer pretended the bad thing wasn't coming. Annabeth can work the research end from camp. Nico can bridge between the Underworld and us. But I need to be there. Harry looked at the window. Dark outside, the grounds gray and frost-covered under a winter sky. Somewhere out there the forbidden forest held the echo of years of preparation, the fingerprints of something patient and old and building toward a purpose it was apparently confident about. All right, Harry said. Talk to Chiron. He'll know a way in that doesn't cause an international incident between the demigod and magical worlds. Already thinking about it, Percy said. Of course you were. A pause. Percy. Whatever this is, I want you to know that I'm not, he stopped, found the right words. I'm not interested in being made into something I didn't choose. Regardless of how powerful it is. I know, Percy said. That's exactly why I'm coming. The fourth incident happened 2 days before Percy arrived. Harry felt it at dinner, the sharp, specific wrongness of a soul being extracted from a living person, and this time it was close. This time it was in the castle, not a corridor away or an hour ago but now, here, same building close. He was on his feet and out of the great hall before his chair had stopped moving, and he heard the collective surprised noise of the hall behind him but he didn't turn back. He ran. Soul senses compass, up 2 floors, right corridor, left passage, the small study room near the library where students sometimes went to work alone. The door was closed. He put his hand on the wood and felt through it, one presence, fading. Not dead yet. Partial extraction. The soul half in and half out, held in an excruciating suspension that his senses translated as something like being pulled in two directions by forces that didn't care what the pulling cost. He opened the door. The room was dim, one lamp, late evening, a desk and two chairs. In one of the chairs, a sixth-year Slytherin girl named Daphne Greengrass sat rigid and still, her eyes open and empty and her hands flat on the desk as if she'd been frozen mid-motion. She was alive. Barely. The soul was mostly out, held in the suspension he'd felt through the door. In the room with her, visible to Harry's death sense and to his death sense only, a column of dark, cold intention. No body. No form. Just presence, organized around a purpose, the way a whirlpool was organized around an absence. It was reading as familiar in his senses. Deeply familiar. Like the echo in the forest clearing, except the forest echo was a fingerprint and this was the hand itself. It turned toward him. And Harry felt, for the first time in his life, something very close to being recognized by something that had been waiting to recognize him for a very long time. He did not step back. He stepped forward, planted his feet, and looked at the presence directly with the full weight of his death sense, not passively, not just receiving information, but actively, the way his father had taught him to confront death, head-on, with complete attention, without flinching. "Let her go," he said. The presence didn't move. It waited. "I said let her go." He reached out with his death sense and wrapped it around Daphne Greengrass's half-extracted soul, not pulling, that would tear it, and a torn soul was worse than no soul, but grounding it, giving it a tether back to its body. Holding the door open on one side while something else held it on the other. A standoff in the space between life and death, fought entirely in dimensions most people couldn't access. The presence pressed. Harry pressed back. He felt his power expand in a way it rarely did in the mortal world. The underworld usually amplified it but the mortal world muffled it, and he'd compensated by working with more precision. Now the muffling fell away and what came up from underneath it was not restrained or cautious or calibrated. It was the full depth of what 17 years in the oldest kingdom in existence had built, and it was, in the plainest terms he had for it, enormous. The presence recoiled. Just slightly. Just enough for the grip on Daphne's soul to loosen for a fraction of a second. Harry pulled. Sharply, cleanly, the way you pulled something back from a current, not against the force but perpendicular to it, using the gap in pressure rather than fighting the pressure head-on. It was a technique his father had drilled into him for 3 weeks in the training chambers. Daphne Greengrass's soul snapped back into her body. She gasped, which was the sound of the soul reconnecting, a full-body breath that was also a statement from the soul, "I am here, I am here, I am here." Her eyes cleared. She looked at Harry without understanding what she was looking at or what had just happened. "You're okay," he said. His voice was level. His hands, which she couldn't see and which mattered because they told him what his body knew even when his mind was managing the scene, were not quite steady. "You're okay. Stay in the chair." She stayed in the chair. She was shaking. He turned back to the room. The presence was gone, withdrawn, not destroyed, the difference between someone leaving a room and someone ceasing to exist, and he had enough experience with both to tell them apart clearly. It had retreated. It had not, he noticed with a cold specificity, been surprised by what he'd done. It had withdrawn the way something withdraws when it has gathered sufficient data. The way you stop an experiment when you have the result you came for. He sat in the other chair and put his elbows on his desk and his hands over his face and breathed. Daphne said, "What just happened?" "Something tried to take your soul," he said, from behind his hands. "I got it back." A long pause. "My soul." "Yes." Another pause. "Are you serious?" He lowered his hands and looked at her. She was pale and her hands were still flat on the desk and her eyes were doing the specific thing eyes did when the mind behind them was trying to fit an impossible thing into an existing framework. "I am very serious," he said. And I need you to tell me everything that happened before I came in. Everything you felt, everything you saw. Leave nothing out. She told him. She'd been studying alone, she often studied alone, she said, she preferred it, and she'd felt cold, suddenly cold, and then the cold had become something with direction, something pressing inward from everywhere at once, and then she struggled for the word, split. Divided. As if the part of her that was her and the part of her that was her body had been separated mid-sentence. Did you hear anything? Harry asked. Feel any presence? Any communication? She shook her head. Then stopped. There was, I thought it was my imagination. I thought it was the cold. But there was she pressed her lips together. A sound. Not a sound exactly. A word that wasn't a sound. What word? She looked at him with her dark eyes wide and steady in her pale face, and said, soon. Harry sat with that for exactly 2 seconds. Then he picked up his mirror. Nico, he said. Get my father on the line. Right now. He looked at Daphne, who was looking back at him with the shell-shocked clarity of someone who had just been to the edge of something and come back and hadn't decided yet whether to be afraid. And Nico, tell him the thing in the underworld that's been moving the souls. I've met it. It spoke. He paused. It knows when I'm coming. Nico's voice from the mirror, did it hurt anyone? It tried. He held Daphne's gaze for a moment, saw the question in it, the who are you, what just happened in this room, and answered the part he could answer. No. It didn't succeed. He looked back at the mirror. Tell my father, he said, that whatever's been waiting to find me, I found it first. Chapter 4, Brother against Brother. Percy arrived at Hogwarts on a Wednesday morning in December, which was the kind of day that Scotland produced with apparent personal enthusiasm, grey sky, cold that had opinions, a wind off the lake that made clear it was not interested in your comfort or your plans. He came through a passage that Chiron had arranged via a contact in the British magical world, a squib cartographer named Evander Wells who knew more about the space between ordinary geography and magical geography than most wizards did and who had agreed to the arrangement with the kind of cheerful pragmatism that suggested this was not his strangest commission. Percy stepped out of the passage into the shadow of the castle's east wall and looked up. Okay, he said to nobody. That's a castle. Annabeth had told him what to expect. Annabeth always told him what to expect and he always listened, and it never fully prepared him because there was a difference between the description of a thing and the thing itself, and Hogwarts was very emphatically the thing itself. It was enormous and old, and it sat in the Scottish landscape with the specific quality of something that had grown there rather than been built, and the lake beside it was dark and flat, and Percy could feel the water's awareness of him the way he always felt bodies of water, a recognition, a pulse of acknowledgement, the water knowing one of Poseidon's children was nearby. Something very large moved under the surface and Percy gave it a small wave. Giant squid, Harry said from behind him. Percy turned. Harry was leaning against the wall in his school robes, dark jacket underneath, hands in his pockets, with the expression of someone who had been standing there long enough to have expected Percy to notice sooner. How long have you been there? Percy asked. Since you waved at the squid. I felt it move. I know. That's why I waited, I wanted to see if you'd wave. Something in Harry's expression shifted toward something warmer. Welcome to Hogwarts. They looked at each other for a moment. It had been 6 weeks since camp, 6 weeks of mirror messages and increasingly alarming information shared across the distance, and seeing Harry in person was different from the mirror in the specific way that presence was always different from image. Harry looked tired in a way the mirror hadn't shown, the particular tiredness of someone who had been sleeping in the same room as a problem for weeks and hadn't been able to put it down at night. You look terrible, Percy said. Thank you, Harry said. You look like you've never owned a winter coat. Percy looked down at his hoodie. It's fine. It is absolutely not fine. It's December in Scotland. I'm a son of the sea god. Cold doesn't really, I'll find you a coat, Harry said, and pushed off the wall and started walking. "Come on. I'll show you where you're sleeping." The room of requirement is cooperating today. It made something that looks like a demigod bunk, which I take to mean the castle is paying attention to visitors. Percy fell into step beside him. "The castle pays attention." "The castle pays attention to everything. It's very old and it has opinions." Harry opened a side door in the east wall and held it. "The portraits talk. The staircases move. The ceiling in the Great Hall shows the actual sky. And there's a poltergeist named Peeves who I have reached an understanding with." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where he leaves me alone because I showed him what a shade looks like at close range." Harry said this with complete placidity. He was curious about death. Most trickster-adjacent entities are. Percy walked into the castle. It hit him all at once, the warmth, the light of torches and brackets, the smell of something old and specific that wasn't quite the camp's musty old building smell, something more alive than that, as if the stone itself was breathing. And underneath all of it, something Percy's demigod senses caught and filed, a subtle wrongness. Not everywhere. Not overwhelming. But present, the same way a note slightly out of tune was present in an otherwise clean chord. "You feel it," Harry said. "Yeah." Percy looked at the ceiling of the corridor. "Something's off. Something's been off since October." Harry walked without looking at the walls because he knew them by now, and Percy noticed that, the way Harry navigated the castle, the certainty of it, not the forced certainty of someone pretending comfort but the real kind. 3 confirmed extractions. 1 partial. 17 souls missing from the Underworld's accounting as of this morning. My father's message at breakfast. 17, Percy said. The number has been climbing since November. Harry turned a corner and took a staircase that immediately swung left with them on it, moving without warning. Percy grabbed the railing. Harry didn't. The Hogwarts staff know a student died in October and that 2 others have had what the healer is calling severe magical episodes. They don't know what's actually happening. I've been managing the information gap. Meaning you've been investigating alone. Meaning I've been investigating with the resources I have. Harry. I know, Harry said, and the 2 words had the weight of someone who had been carrying a thing alone and was aware of it and had decided to keep carrying it anyway because the alternative was involving people in something they weren't equipped for. I know. That's why you're here. They reached the room of requirement on the 7th floor. Harry walked past the stretch of blank wall 3 times with the easy habit of someone who'd done it often enough that it was automatic, and the door appeared. Inside was a space that read as a hybrid of a small bedroom and a tactical planning room, which Percy suspected reflected both the castle's reading of the situation and Harry's specific request. There was a bed, a desk covered in papers in a cipher Percy couldn't read, a mirror mounted on the wall, and a large flat surface in the center of the room that held, laid out with precision, a map. Not a geographical map. A diagram of connections, souls, locations, dates, signatures, drawn in a clear hand with lines connecting points and notations in the cipher. Percy looked at it for a long moment. You built this, he said. Over 3 weeks. Harry came to stand beside him. Every extraction site. Every missing soul my father can identify. Every location where I felt the presence directly. He pointed to 3 sites on the Hogwarts grounds. These are confirmed. The forest clearing predates my arrival. The ghost room and the study room are October and November. He pointed to the study room notation. This is where it spoke. Soon, Percy said. He'd gotten the mirror message. Soon. Harry traced a line from the 3 Hogwarts sites outward to a cluster of points that weren't on any map Percy recognized. These are the external sites. 11 locations across Britain where my father has detected extraction signatures. Plus 6 more across Europe that he's less certain about. He looked at Percy. The external sites predate the Hogwarts ones by years. The Hogwarts sites are recent. Which means whatever this is, it moved here. It followed me. Percy looked at the map. At the lines. At the way the lines, if you followed them, all oriented toward a central point that Harry had marked with a single symbol, a circle with a line through it, the notation for unknown origin. The container, Percy said. Between realms. My father can feel it. Can't locate it. Can't access it. Harry's voice stayed level, but Percy had been talking to this person for 2 months and had learned to hear what lived under the level voice. 17 souls in a space Hades can't reach. That's not a small thing. No, Percy said. That's not a small thing. He looked at the unknown origin marker. Primordial space. Annabeth has been digging into it. She found references in some of the older Olympian records, spaces between divine territories that existed before the territorial divisions. Before Olympus, before the Underworld, before Poseidon's domain. Spaces that belong to nothing. Except the things that live in them. Yeah. Percy met his eyes. She found a name. Harry waited. Thanatos, Percy said. Not the official Thanatos, not death as a minor divine force. The older version. Pre-Olympian. Before death had a structure and a territory and a god sitting in judgment. He watched Harry's face. Primordial death. The force itself, before it was domesticated into the divine order. Something moved in Harry's expression. Not surprise, it was the expression of someone hearing the confirmation of a thing they had almost named themselves and hadn't quite. Thanatos, he said. The Olympians absorbed him. Gave him a role, death personification, minor divine force, works under Hades' jurisdiction. Gave him a domain and a structure and limitations. Percy folded his arms. Annabeth thinks that didn't go as smoothly as the official records suggest. She thinks Thanatos was diminished. Reduced. The primordial version of him got compressed into something smaller than it used to be, and that compression didn't sit well, and it's been sitting badly for a very long time. Harry turned back to the map. A primordial force that was compressed into a minor role, he said. That has been watching the structure of death from inside a diminished form for thousands of years. He was quiet for a moment. And then Hades adopted a mortal child and raised him in the underworld, and the child grew up with access to death magic that nobody formally trained him to have limits on. Percy felt the shape of it. You developed abilities that should have had institutional caps on them. Because you weren't trained institutionally. You were raised by the god of the dead as his actual son. And Thanatos noticed, Harry said. And started, building toward you, Percy said. Yes. The room was quiet. Percy looked at Harry and Harry looked at the map, and they both sat with the thing that had just assembled itself out of the pieces. He wants you to become the god of death, Percy said. The real version. The pre-Olympian version. Not Hades' heir. Not a death god with a domain and limitations. An absolute god of death. He paused. That's what the souls are for. That's the container. He's building the raw material for an apotheosis. An ascension to godhood, Harry said. Using stolen souls as fuel. Yes. And he needs me specifically because you're the only person alive who has the power base and the underworld conditioning to survive the process. Percy held his gaze. And because you're Hades' son. The symbolism of it, a child of the underworld becoming what the underworld was always built around. It's not just practical. It's, Annabeth used the word mythologically resonant. Annabeth would, Harry said. Not unkindly. She means it would be hard to undo. The kind of thing that changes the divine order structurally, not just in terms of power. Percy unfolded his arms and moved toward the map. The killing, the soul extractions, he's not just building power. He's demonstrating the technique. He's been using a version of your power, the power you will have if he gets what he wants, to do the extractions. Like, he's showing you what you could do. What you could already do, if you became what he intends. Harry said nothing for a moment. Percy let him have the silence. The feeling of being studied, Harry said finally. Since before I left the Underworld. Since childhood, maybe. He's been watching me my whole life. Yes. And the extractions with my signature. The soul that went to Camp Half-Blood. The message in the study room. Harry traced the connection lines on the map without touching the paper. He's not just building toward it. He's communicating. He looked up. He wants me to know. He wants me to see what I could be. He thinks if you understand the offer, Percy said carefully, you'll want it. The silence that followed was specific. Percy watched Harry's face during it, watched the careful quality of it, the way someone looks when they are being honest with themselves about something they'd rather not be honest about. It lasted 3 seconds. Maybe 4. He's not entirely wrong, Harry said. Percy didn't react. He kept his face neutral and his voice even, and he said, "Tell me." Harry turned away from the map and sat on the edge of the desk. The dead go missing and nobody in the mortal world notices. Not really. Not in the way that would stop it. The wizarding world doesn't know what a soul extraction is. The demigod world isn't equipped to investigate it. The underworld can detect it but can't locate the container. He looked at his hands. I can detect it. I can feel every missing soul in the accounting, not the individuals, but the weight of the absence, the way a room feels wrong when something that should be in it isn't. 17 people who should be in Elysium or Asphodel or wherever they earned, and they're not, because something pulled them out of the flow of death, and nobody with the power to do anything about it can do anything about it. Except you, Percy said. If I were what Thanatos intends me to be, if I had that level of access, that kind of absolute claim on the flow of death, I could find the container. I could return every one of those souls. I could close the space between realms that he's operating from. He said it the way he said everything, with precision, without drama. I could stop the extractions permanently. Every extraction that's happened and every one that would happen. Because the god of death in the pre-Olympian sense doesn't just govern the dead. He governs the dying. Every death, every soul, every passage, all of it falls within that domain. Nothing Thanatos is doing could happen without my knowledge or permission. Harry. I know what I'm saying. Do you? Percy moved closer. Because what you're describing, that level of dominion, that's not you with more power. That's you replaced by something that wears your face. That's the apotheosis, Harry. You don't get to be you afterward. That's not how primordial forces work. Harry looked at him. You don't know that. Annabeth does, Percy said. She spent 4 days in the older record specifically looking for this. Primordial apotheosis doesn't elevate the individual. It consumes them. The human, or demigod, or whatever the vessel is, doesn't survive the process as a distinct consciousness. The primordial force absorbs the vessel. What's left is the force, wearing the vessel's form. He held Harry's gaze. You would be gone. Whatever walks out of that apotheosis isn't Harry Potter. It isn't Hades' son. It's primordial death in a body it used to share with someone. Harry was quiet. Looking at something Percy couldn't see. I know, Harry said, at last. I know that. I've known it since I worked out what Thanatos was building. He looked at Percy and the green eyes were entirely honest. I said he's not entirely wrong about the appeal. I didn't say I was going to do it. Percy let out a breath he hadn't entirely been aware of holding. Okay. But I need you to understand why the appeal is real, Harry said. Because if you don't understand that, if you think this is simple, that I'm just saying no because it's obviously wrong, then you're not actually helping me. You're just standing next to me while I make the right choice for incomplete reasons, and incomplete reasons don't hold when the pressure gets serious. Percy looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay. I'm listening. The dead deserve better than they get, Harry said. It came out flat and certain, the way his deepest convictions always came out, not with force but with the weight of things that had been examined from every angle and found true from all of them. I have spent my entire life in a kingdom full of people who were finished. Who had completed their lives and arrived at whatever the sum of those lives added up to. And the system that governs that, the divine order, the Olympian structure, the whole apparatus, it is old and it is imperfect and it is operated by beings who have not been human in millennia and sometimes forget what that means. He paused. My father is good at his role. He is genuinely just. But he is one God and the scale of death in the mortal world is, he stopped. Started again. There are souls in Asphodel who shouldn't be there. I have felt them. People who deserved better than a grey field of dull contentment for eternity. People who fell through the cracks of a divine bureaucracy. He looked at the map. The power Thanatos is offering wouldn't just be power. It would be, correction. The ability to see every case. Every soul. Not through a system that misses things but directly, absolutely, without intermediary. The perfect judge, Percy said quietly. Yes. Harry. Percy sat down across from him on the only other available surface, which turned out to be the floor, because he was Percy and floors were fine. Can I tell you something that's going to sound like an argument but is actually just the truth? Those are usually the same thing, Harry said. Every tyrant in history, every person who ever took absolute power and used it badly, started with something real. A genuine problem they genuinely wanted to fix. A real injustice that the existing system was genuinely failing to address. He looked up at Harry from the floor. That doesn't make the power right. It makes it more dangerous, because the intention behind it is real enough that the person holding it can convince themselves it's different. That they're different. A pause. You're not a tyrant. You're not even close to one. But the logic you just used is the same logic. And you're smart enough to know it. Harry looked at him for a long time. I know it, he said finally. That's the whole problem. Then the castle shook. Not an earthquake, not a structural tremor. Something deeper and more specific, the shaking of a place when something divine moves through it without asking permission. The torches in the room of requirement flickered. The mirror on the wall clouded. On the map, the lines between points shifted, physically shifted, the paper pulling as if magnetized toward the unknown origin marker. Percy was on his feet. Harry was already at the door. It's in the forest, Harry said. He didn't say how he knew. He didn't need to. Percy had learned to take Harry's death sense as read the same way Harry had learned to take Percy's water awareness as read. They were what they were and arguing with them wasted time. They ran. The castle at night was not the same castle as in daylight. The torches threw long shadows and the moving staircases moved differently, more erratically, as if they were disturbed, and the portraits on the walls were awake and watching, murmuring to each other in their frames, the particular murmur of things that had seen a great deal and recognized the quality of the current moment as significant. A portrait of a grey-haired witch near the main staircase said, as they passed, the forest, boys. The old clearing. Something woke the trees. Harry didn't slow down. I know, he said. They went through the entrance hall and out the main doors and across the grounds at a run, and Percy felt the night air on his face and the particular electric quality of a divine event building, the air doing the thing it did when power was being gathered, tightening, like the world was holding its breath, pressure building the way pressure built before lightning. The forest was dark. Obviously dark, forest at night dark, but underneath the natural dark was the other kind, the kind Percy recognized from encounters with things that lived outside the normal divine order, the dark that was less an absence of light and more a presence of something else. They moved through the trees, and Percy let Harry lead because Harry could navigate this dark with his death sense and Percy would have been slower alone. The clearing was ahead. Percy could feel it before he could see it, the specific quality of gathered power, the sense of something enormous in a small space. They broke through the tree line and stopped. The clearing was full of light. Not torchlight. Not magical fire. Something older, the cold white luminescence of primordial force given momentary form, light that existed not as illumination but as the byproduct of something vast thinking about itself. And at the center of it, present in a way that was more than physical, the thing Percy had been calling Thanatos in his mind took a shape for the first time. It looked like a man. Approximately. The form kept its rough outline but the specifics shifted, eyes that were too deep, a stillness that wasn't the stillness of a body at rest but the stillness of something that had never had to move because everything eventually came to it. It was not monstrous. That was the thing Percy registered and felt the wrongness of. It should have been monstrous, given what it had been doing. It wasn't. It was almost beautiful, the way inevitable things were beautiful when you stopped fighting them. It looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "You came," Thanatos said. His voice was what Percy had always imagined the sound of a long-held breath finally released would be. "I wondered if you would." "You shook the castle," Harry said. "Bit obvious." "I intended it to be." He looked at Percy with a gaze that moved across Percy the way weather moved across landscape, noting him, filing him, not particularly concerned. "You brought the sea's child." "He's my brother," Harry said. "Yes." Something moved in the primordial eyes. "I know what he is to you. I have known everything about you for a very long time, Harry." He said the name with the specific weight of someone who had been holding it for years. "Longer than your parents have known you. Since before the Underworld chose to keep you." A pause. "The Underworld didn't keep you by accident. You know that." "Everything in the Underworld has a reason," Harry said. "The reason you survived Voldemort's curse wasn't just your mother's love. Love is a ward, yes. But the curse that should have ended you found, resistance. A specific resistance. The soul of a child who was already oriented toward death in a way that made the curse's mechanism unfamiliar." Thanatos tilted his head. "You were born with an affinity for death that your mortal magic couldn't express. The curse recognized it and couldn't process it and rebounded. And Hades, feeling a soul arrive at the veil that was more at home in his kingdom than in the mortal world, made a choice." He looked at Harry steadily. "I made sure he felt you." The silence that followed was the most specific silence Percy had ever experienced. Harry's expression didn't break. "You arranged my adoption." "I prepared the conditions for it," Thanatos said. "Hades made the choice freely. I would not take that from him, or from you." A small movement, almost gentle. "I am not your enemy, Harry. I have never been your enemy. I have been your architect. Your circumstance. Everything you are was shaped to bring you to this moment, and everything you are is magnificent. You must know that. You killed people," Harry said. "You extracted souls from living people and you stored them and 17 of them are still in a container in a space my father can't reach." "A demonstration," Thanatos said. "Of what is possible. Of the scale at which death is mismanaged by the current order." He moved and the light moved with him, the way wind moved through tall grass. The form was surface, what was underneath was the real motion. 17 souls. There are 17 souls taken improperly every second in the mortal world. People who die too soon, too late, in the wrong circumstances, processed through a divine bureaucracy that hasn't updated its practices since the Bronze Age. 17 souls in a container that distresses your father is nothing. It is a fraction. I wanted you to feel the fraction. So I would want the whole, Harry said. So you would understand the scale of what needs fixing. Percy had been watching this with the focused attention of someone who knew that what was being said mattered and what was being built toward mattered more. He'd been quiet because Harry needed to drive this, and because he knew his role here wasn't the lead, but he felt something shifting in the clearing, a quality of intention gathering, and he said, "Harry." "I know," Harry said without turning. "He's building toward the offer," Percy said. "Right now." In this conversation. This is the offer. Thanatos looked at Percy with something that might have been appreciation. Perceptive, he said. The sea's children usually are. He looked back at Harry. I have been building toward this since you were 11 months old. I am not going to insult either of us by rushing it now. He held Harry's gaze, and what was in his own was not cruelty, not the blank appetite of a monster, but something worse, the absolute conviction of someone who believed they were right. You have felt the appeal. I know you have. Your brother knows it. You told him. He tilted his head. The dead deserve better. You said that. You believed it then and you believe it now. Nothing I can tell you will make you believe it more than you already do. No, Harry agreed. So I won't argue the case. The case is your own. Thanatos extended a hand, literally, physically, a gesture of offering. I will only tell you what it costs and what it gains, and let you decide as the person you are rather than the person the divine order wants you to be. He held the hand open. Your consciousness persists. I told you it would not. I allowed your brother to find that information because I wanted you to confront it honestly. The older texts are wrong. I am not a primordial force that consumes vessels. I am a consciousness that has been compressed into a form too small for thousands of years, and I need a new form large enough to hold what I am. You are not a vessel. You are a partner. The apotheosis is not consumption. It is a merger. Both of us, in a form built for both of us. His eyes were entirely serious. You would remain Harry. You would also become something more. Harry looked at the open hand. Percy moved. He stepped between Harry and Thanatos in one motion, not touching either, just putting himself in the space. No, he said. Thanatos looked at him. This is not your choice. You're right, Percy said. It's his. But you're making it while he's standing in a clearing full of your light, after weeks of being worn down by this investigation, after you've spent 17 years building toward this moment. You've been shaping every condition of his life to make this offer as appealing as possible at exactly this moment. He held Thanatos' gaze. He wasn't afraid. He was, genuinely, not afraid. He had been through things that reset the definition of frightening, and a primordial force being unreasonably persuasive about something that was bad for his brother didn't make it onto that list. That's not a free choice. That's a engineered one. Percy, Harry said from behind him. What? A pause. Move. Percy turned. Harry was looking at him with an expression that was complicated and genuine and had in it something that Percy thought was gratitude and something else that was the specific expression of someone who had made a decision and needed to be the one to act on it themselves. Move, Harry said again. Quietly. Percy moved. He stepped aside, not because he was sure this was right, but because Harry was right. It was Harry's choice, and taking it from him wasn't protection. It was just a different kind of being unmade. Harry looked at Thanatos. The souls in the container, he said. Return them. Thanatos tilted his head. The apotheosis, the souls first. Return them to the underworld. All 17. Complete passage, proper accounting, my father's kingdom. Harry's voice was absolutely level. Do that now. I can do that after, now, Harry said. Before I say another word about any offer you're making, you return what you took. The clearing was very still. The light pulsed once, twice, something like deliberation. Then Thanatos lowered his hand and the container opened. Percy felt it, felt the sudden rush of something being released into the divine flow, 17 small lights in his peripheral awareness suddenly moving again, going somewhere, completing something. He saw Harry's eyes close briefly and then open again, and he knew Harry had felt it more completely than Percy had felt every one of those souls slot back into the accounting of death where they belonged. Done, Thanatos said. Thank you, Harry said. And then Harry pulled his wand. Not a drawn-out movement. Not theatrical. The kind of motion that happened in the space between one moment and the next, efficient and deliberate, and the wand cleared his wrist and he had it pointed at Thanatos before the word thank you had finished arriving at Percy's ears. Percy had his own sword out, riptide, uncapped, the celestial bronze blade catching the clearing's cold light, in the same half-second. "I'm not accepting your offer," Harry said. His voice was the same as it had been for the entire conversation, exact, controlled, with what lived under it fully present and not hidden. "Not tonight. Not in this clearing that you prepared. Not in this conversation that you engineered. Not now and not ever, unless I decided on my own terms in my own time with information that didn't come from you." He held the wand steady, and what came through it, what Percy could feel at the edge of his awareness even standing several feet away, was enormous and cold and completely without apology. "You want to make an offer. Make it to my father. Through proper channels. In Olympus, in the Underworld, in whatever court has jurisdiction over a primordial force manipulating the divine order." He paused. "Until then, stay out of my school." Thanatos looked at the wand. At Harry. "You are more than I hoped," he said, and the terrifying thing was that it sounded entirely genuine. "Even now. Even refusing." He looked at Percy. "Keep him safe, son of the sea. What hunts him now is not me." And then the light went out. The clearing was just a clearing. Dark, cold, frost on the ground. The trees around them were ordinary trees. Percy stood with riptide up for 3 seconds before he lowered it, and Harry stood with the wand up for 4 before he lowered that. The silence was different now. The specific silence of a space where something enormous had just been and then hadn't. "What did he mean?" Percy said. "What hunts him now is not me." Harry stared at the space where Thanatos had been. "I don't know." "Did you believe him? About the merger? That you'd both persist?" A pause. "I don't know that either." He turned and looked at Percy, and Percy could see the exhaustion now without the controlled surface managing it, the weeks of this settling into his face. "I know I'm not doing it on his terms. In his clearing. In his engineered moment." He put the wand away. "The rest I have to think about." "Fair," Percy said. They stood in the forest in the cold and the dark, and somewhere above them the castle sat on its hill with its inhabited weight, and the Styx was moving somewhere far below in its sideways wrong direction current, and 17 souls had just gone back to where they belonged. "Thank you," Harry said. "For moving." "You said move," Percy said. "You were right. And for saying what you said before you moved." Harry looked at him. "About the engineering." "I knew it, but, sometimes you need someone to say it out loud," Percy said. "Yeah." He glanced at the tree line. "We should get back to the castle." "We should." Harry started walking. "Percy." "What Thanatos said at the end, something else is hunting you," Percy said. "Yes. And Thanatos, who has been the architect of your entire life, says it's not him and seemed, genuinely, like he wanted you warned." "Yes." Percy thought about that on the walk back through the trees, through the dark, through the cold that finally, now that the adrenaline was settling, was making itself known through his hoodie in a way he wasn't going to admit to Harry. He thought about a primordial force that had shaped a person's existence from infancy with what seemed, in its own genuinely disturbing way, like care. Who had returned 17 souls when asked? Who had said what hunts him now is not me with the specific quality of someone giving a warning about a third party? He thought about the pattern in Harry's map. The lines converging. The unknown origin marker. He thought about the scar on Harry's forehead and the soul fragment it contained and the dark wizard who had spent 16 years trying to reconstitute himself. He thought about the way the scar had been described, active, awake, more present since arriving in Britain. "Harry," he said. "I know," Harry said, and his voice had changed, the careful levelness of it doing something new, something that Percy could only describe as the sound of the final piece of a map connecting to all the others. "Voldemort. He's been watching too, Harry said. The whole time. Thanatos and Voldemort have both been watching me. And I've been so focused on the soul extractions, on Thanatos, you missed the other signal, Percy said. The scar. The fragment. It hasn't just been waking up because I'm in Britain. Harry stopped walking. Percy stopped with him. The castle was visible now, the lights of it warm and distant through the trees. It's been responding to something nearby. He turned. Someone has been trying to make contact through the fragment. Not Thanatos. Something, his face was doing the thing it did when his death sense was giving him information he was processing in real time. Something smaller. Fragmented. Desperate. He looked at Percy. He's here. Or part of him is. The fragment of his soul that survived, it's been looking for the part in my scar. It's been trying to use me as a tether. Percy felt the cold get colder. For what? Harry's expression settled into something that was not afraid and not reckless but the specific thing between them, clear-eyed and completely present and ready for whatever the next thing was. For reconstitution, he said. He wants to come back through the scar. Through me. A pause. Through the very power Thanatos has been building in me. The death magic. He looked at the castle. My power would be the conduit. Thanatos' container, the space between realms, would be the anchor. He breathed. They're not working together. But Voldemort has been watching Thanatos build me up and he intends to use the result. Percy said nothing for a moment. Then, so we have a primordial force that wants to merge with you to fix death, and a dark wizard who wants to use your power to rebuild himself, and they are separately and simultaneously working toward the same end point. Essentially. And neither of them has consulted you. No. Harry. Yes. Next time something has been watching you since birth, Percy said, I'd like to know earlier. Harry looked at him. And for the first time since Percy had arrived at Hogwarts, since the clearing, since the conversation that had covered 17 stolen souls and primordial force and the appeals and counterarguments of a god who had engineered a lifetime, Harry almost laughed. Noted, he said. They walked back to the castle together, and the night was very cold, and the problem ahead of them was larger than either of them had thought when the day started, and Percy was aware of both of these things and found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, entirely prepared to deal with them. He was also, despite everything, going to find Harry a coat. Chapter 5, Thanatos Speaks. The Underworld had a parliament of sorts, which was not something the divine order advertised and which functioned less like a formal legislative body and more like the specific gathering that happened when Hades decided a matter required witnesses and nobody wanted to be the person who didn't show up. It convened in the throne room with the tapestries Persephone had insisted upon, and it operated according to rules that Hades had established over millennia and which everyone present understood to be non-negotiable. The rule that mattered most today was this: every party speaks in full. Nobody leaves until every party has spoken in full. Hades had learned this rule from the consequences of its absence, from the disputes that had spiraled into wars because someone left the table before the other side had finished talking, and he enforced it with the patience of someone who had infinite time and zero interest in repeating history. Thanatos arrived through the Underworld's boundary at dawn on the Thursday after the forest clearing, which was simultaneously the most ordinary and most significant arrival the kingdom had received in several centuries. He came without the clearing's cold light, without the primordial weight of his full presence, wearing instead the form he used when operating in the divine order, the official death personification form, the lesser version of himself that Olympus had sanctioned. He was still enormous, still other, but contained in a way that fit within the underworld structure without straining it. Hades met him at the gate personally, which was the specific kind of statement that meant, I know exactly what you are, I know exactly what you've done, and I am choosing procedure over reaction because procedure is what separates governance from violence. Lord Hades, Thanatos said. You're expected, Hades said. And turned and walked back to the palace, and Thanatos followed, because that was how this worked. Percy and Harry came through the underworld gateway 2 hours later. Harry navigated the passage home with the ease of someone who'd been using it his whole life, and Percy came through it for the first time with the expression of someone whose body was registering several things simultaneously: the cold, the dim, the specific quality of ambient death magic that was to Harry's power what background radiation was to a reactor, present everywhere and unnoticed by those who grew up in it. "It's bigger than I expected," Percy said, looking at the palace as it emerged from the Underworld's grey light. "I don't know. Darker." "It is dark," Harry said. "You've been here 30 seconds. It's also, there are flowers. My mother gardens." Percy looked at the asphodels lining the path to the palace gates and seemed to reorganize something in his internal model of the Underworld. "Right," he said. "Okay." Persephone was waiting in the entrance hall. Percy had met divine beings before. He'd met Olympians, had stood in the presence of his own father, had spoken with Athena, who was terrifying in the specific way of beings whose intelligence operated at a scale that made most conversations feel like being slowly outthought. He had a baseline calibrated well above average for encounters with the divine. Persephone did something to his baseline that he hadn't expected. She crossed the entrance hall when they came in, and she went straight to Harry, and what she did was put her hands on his face the way Percy had seen parents do with children when the children had been somewhere the parents couldn't follow and had come back safe. It was the most human gesture Percy had ever seen from a divine being, and it was so thoroughly and obviously genuine that it didn't feel like condescension or performance or any of the things divine affection sometimes accidentally felt like. It felt like a mother and her son in an entrance hall after a hard week, and Percy looked away from it for a moment because it was private in a way that had nothing to do with the political significance of the meeting they were about to have. "You returned the souls," Persephone said to Harry, quietly. "He returned them when I asked," Harry said. "I know. Your father has the accounting. All 17. She stepped back. Her expression moved through something that wasn't quite relief. She'd known the souls were coming back. The Underworld's accounting had updated in real time, and landed on something more complicated. The look of a parent who had sent their child into something dangerous and now had to look at the fact that the dangerous thing was not resolved, only temporarily relocated. She looked at Percy. "Percy Jackson." "Yes ma'am," Percy said. She looked at him for a moment with the specific quality of assessment that gods used when they were determining something important quickly. Whatever she was determining, it settled. "Thank you," she said. "For going to him." "He's my brother," Percy said. Which was the same thing Harry had said to Thanatos in the clearing, and Percy noticed Harry noticed this and not say anything about it. "Come," she said. "Your father is waiting." The throne room was more populated than Percy had ever imagined the Underworld's political spaces being. Hades sat on the great obsidian throne with the particular posture of absolute authority that Percy had seen on Olympus and recognized, the posture that said I am not performing power because I don't need to perform what I simply am. To his right, standing rather than seated because standing was what she did when she was both present as his queen and reserving the right to move quickly, was Persephone. Thanatos stood at the center of the room, in the space that would be the defendant's position in any court, which it functionally was. He had his hands behind his back and his expression was the one that Percy, looking at it, thought of as the expression of someone who had prepared their argument thoroughly and was not concerned about delivering it. Nico was near the far wall, between two of the Underworld's silent armored guards, in the position of someone who had been invited as a witness and was taking the role seriously by doing absolutely nothing to call attention to himself. And at the center of the room, at a position that was neither defendant nor judge but its own specific place, the place of the person who was the subject of this entire gathering, Harry stood. He had changed out of his school robes on the way through. He was in the dark jacket, the simple clothes Persephone had given him, the blade at his belt and the wand at his wrist and the particular quality of self-possession that Percy had been cataloging since camp and still found, honestly, slightly staggering in someone his own age. Percy took a position a few steps behind and to Harry's left. Where a brother stood. "We are assembled," Hades said. His voice in the throne room had a different quality than in conversation, it used the acoustics of the space, the specific resonance of the black stone walls. Let the record of this gathering be noted in the Underworld's accounting. He looked at Thanatos. You requested this audience. I did, Thanatos said. You will speak without interruption. When you are finished, responses will be given without interruption. This is the procedure. I know the procedure, Thanatos said. I was here when you established it. Then begin, Hades said. Thanatos turned slightly, addressing not just Hades but the room, Harry, Percy, Persephone, the witnesses. He did this as a deliberate choice, Percy noted. Making it a conversation with everyone rather than a petition to the throne. The posture of someone who thought their case was strong enough not to need the frame of supplication. I will begin, Thanatos said, with what I am. Not what Olympus made me. What I am. He moved slightly, and the room's temperature dropped by the specific amount that primordial presence produced when it stopped pretending to be comfortable. Before the Titans. Before the Olympians divided the world between sea and sky and earth and death. Before the territories were drawn and the gods were assigned their domains. Death existed. It was not a domain. It was not a territory with a ruler. It was a force, singular, complete, absolute. It governed every ending in existence. Every extinguished star. Every last breath. Every completed thing. He paused. I am that force, he said. What stands before you in this form is what remains after thousands of years of compression. Of being assigned a role within a structure that was built without consulting the oldest thing in it. I am not angry about this. He said it in a way that suggested he had processed the anger and arrived somewhere past it. I understand why it happened. The Olympians needed structure. Structure requires boundaries. Boundaries required someone to govern death rather than letting death govern itself. Hades was assigned the dead. I was assigned the dying. And the compression happened gradually, which is the worst kind, because gradually means you don't notice until you're already half of what you were. The throne room was very quiet. Percy watched Harry watching Thanatos and found he couldn't read Harry's expression with his usual accuracy. What the compression cost, Thanatos continued, was not power in the conventional sense. It was precision. The ability to govern death completely. To see every case. Every soul. Every passage. The bureaucracy that replaced my direct authority has gaps. Lord Hades knows this. He looked at Hades. You are just. You are genuinely just. And the system you run still produces injustice because no finite set of rules fully describes infinite circumstances, and no finite number of judges fully processes infinite cases. The gray fields are full of people who deserved better. You know this too. Hades said nothing. His expression said nothing. But Percy had been in rooms with gods long enough to know that the absence of denial was sometimes the most honest thing in the room. I have been watching Harry Potter since before he had a name in my awareness, Thanatos said, turning to Harry directly. Since before the Potters died. I felt the unusual affinity in the infant soul, the specific orientation toward death that made the killing curse recognize him as adjacent rather than target. I felt Hades feel it. And I made the choice, I am telling you this openly, not as a confession but as an account, I made the choice to amplify what Hades felt. To make the decision to keep the boy easier. Harry said, why? Because I had been watching the Underworld for a long time, Thanatos said, and I had been watching the specific gap in it, the gap between what death governance could be and what it was, and I had been looking for the shape of what could fill that gap. Not a system. Not a rule. A person. He held Harry's gaze. Someone raised in the Underworld who understood death from the inside. Who had lived alongside the consequences of the system's failures. Who had both the power to operate at the necessary scale and the character to operate it justly. He paused. I watched you grow up, Harry. I watched you with the sticks. I watched you in the training chambers and the gardens and the fields of asphodel. I watched you plant things in the dark and tend the souls that others walked past. I watched you sit with the newly dead when they arrived confused and frightened and speak to them the way someone speaks to people they matter to. Something moved in Harry's face. I did not engineer a weapon, Thanatos said quietly. I engineered a king. The silence after that was extensive. Persephone broke it. Not with words, she made a sound, small and involuntary, quickly controlled, the sound of someone receiving information about their child that landed in a complicated way. Percy looked at her. Her face was doing several things at once. The soul extractions, Hades said. His voice was careful in the way of a surgeon's instrument, precise application, no excess. The 17 souls. A demonstration of the scale of need, Thanatos said, his voice steady. And yes, a demonstration of what Harry's power could address. I will not pretend otherwise. I showed him what was broken and I showed him the tool that could fix it. You killed people, Percy said. Thanatos looked at him. I accelerated deaths that were already proximate. The 17 individuals were all within weeks of natural death. I moved the timeline, not the outcome. He said it with the directness of someone who had thought about this and not reached a comfortable conclusion and wasn't going to pretend to have. I know that is not a defense. I know that the weeks mattered. I know that the families and the people themselves would not accept the calculus. He paused. I am telling you what I did and why, not arguing that it was right. Percy held his gaze. You said what hunts him now is not you. A shift in the temperature. Yes. What is it? Thanatos looked at Harry. Tell them what you worked out. After the clearing. Harry said, Voldemort. The name did something to the room. Not the theatrical effect it had in the wizarding world, where people still avoided it out of old fear. Something more specific, the reaction of a divine court to the mention of a soul that had been defying natural death for 16 years, a name that in the Underworld's accounting appeared as an ongoing anomaly, an open case, an administrative fault. Hades sat forward slightly. Slightly was, for Hades, the equivalent of anyone else leaping to their feet. The soul fragment in the scar, Harry said. He touched his forehead briefly. He's been trying to use it as a tether. He's been watching Thanatos build up my death magic and he intends to use the amplified power as a conduit for reconstitution. He looked at his father. The container Thanatos built between realms, the space between divine territories, Voldemort has found it. He can't use it himself, he's too fragmented, but if the apotheosis happened, he would use the between-realm space as an anchor, Hades said. And my power as the conduit, Harry said. He'd come through me. That, Thanatos said, and his voice had lost the measured quality it had maintained through the speech, had become something colder and more direct, is not what I built this for. I know, Harry said. He has been watching from the fragment in your scar. He saw my work. He does not understand it fully, he understands only that the power building in you is enormous and that a fragment of himself is positioned inside you and that this is an opportunity. Thanatos' expression, if it could be called that, did something that Percy classified with some difficulty as fury. The contained, cold fury of someone whose careful work was being instrumentalized for a purpose they find repugnant. Voldemort is, he is the specific thing I am not. He does not want to govern death. He wants to escape it. He has spent his existence running from the thing I am. And now he intends to use the person I have spent 17 years preparing to, he stopped. Restarted. He would be a parasite in the most important host that has ever existed. And you want us to stop him, Percy said. Before the apotheosis. Or as part of it. I want him removed from the equation, Thanatos said. The fragment in the scar needs to be extracted and destroyed. If it is not, the scar becomes a liability in any outcome. If Harry refuses the apotheosis, Voldemort remains a threat through the fragment. If Harry accepts, Voldemort uses the process to reconstitute himself through it. He looked at Harry. The fragment must be dealt with regardless of any other decision. Harry was quiet. Percy watched him and thought about what it meant, this thing that had been in Harry's head his whole life, this piece of someone else's soul, this passenger he'd carried from 11 months old through the Underworld and Hogwarts and into this throne room. He thought about what it would mean to remove it. If the fragment is extracted, Harry said, what happens to Voldemort? He has other fragments, Thanatos said. Horcruxes. The magical world's version of soul fragmentation. He has been distributing pieces of himself for years. Destroying the scar fragment does not destroy Voldemort. It removes his access to you. And the other fragments are a separate problem. No, Harry said. They're the same problem. If we extract the scar fragment and leave the others, Voldemort reconstitutes through one of them eventually. He's been trying for 16 years and he's getting closer. He looked at Hades. The other fragments need to be found and destroyed. That is not a small undertaking, Hades said. I know. But it needs to happen. He looked around the room, at Hades, at Persephone, at Thanatos, at Percy. All of it needs to happen. The scar fragment. The Horcruxes. And, he stopped. Looked at Thanatos. And the question of what I become, Harry said. Or don't. Thanatos waited. Tell me again, Harry said. Without the engineering. Without the clearing and the light and the prepared moment. Tell me now, in this room, what you're actually offering. Thanatos looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat. He sat on the floor of Hades' throne room, which was not a gesture of submission but of something else, of choosing to be at the same level as the person he was speaking to rather than above or below. Percy noticed Hades register this and file it. The apotheosis as I designed it is a merger, Thanatos said. Both consciousnesses persist. You remain Harry. I become, more than I have been, but organized around you rather than consuming you. The result is a being that is both of us, your character, your judgment, your love for specific people, your history, and my scale. My access. My ability to govern death completely without the gaps the current system has. He held Harry's gaze from the floor. You would be a god. Not a death god in a Hades model, something older and more complete. And you would still know your mother's name. You would still remember sitting at the edge of the Styx with your boots off. You would still be, Percy's brother. Everything that makes you persists. What changes is scale. What changes is access. But I would also be you, Harry said. Yes, Thanatos said. As you are also partly your father and your mother and everything that has shaped you. I would be the newest and most significant shaping. But not a replacement. Harry looked at the floor for a moment. Then at Percy. Percy said nothing. This was the specific moment he'd been thinking about since the forest clearing, the moment when it was Harry's, fully Harry's, and Percy's role was not argument or persuasion but presence. Just to be there. Just to be the person who would still be there whatever the decision was. He met Harry's eyes and gave the smallest nod that meant, I'm here. Not agreement. Just, I'm here. Harry looked at Hades. Hades looked back at his son with the expression that wasn't designed to communicate anything specific and communicated, to the specific person who had grown up watching it, everything. The tightness at the jaw that was the containment of feeling. The eyes that were the eyes of someone holding something enormous at arm's length because letting it closer would compromise the judgment required right now. The posture that was dignity and love performing the same function simultaneously. I need to know, Harry said to him, what you think. I think, Hades said, with extraordinary care, that you are my son. Whatever you decide, you remain my son. The Underworld is your home and will remain your home regardless of what shape you inhabit. He paused. I also think that I made an error when you left for the mortal world. I told you that you knew who you were. I believed that was sufficient. I did not consider adequately that someone had been shaping the conditions of your knowledge since before you had the capacity to evaluate those conditions. He looked at Thanatos. I am not forgiving what was done. But I am acknowledging that the analysis was not simple. Father, Harry said. What I think, Hades said, more quietly, is that you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known. And I have known everyone who has ever lived. He let that sit. I think whatever you are after this decision, that remains true. Persephone made the sound again. This time she didn't control it quickly. Percy thought, this family. And then felt the specific warmth of that thought, this family that he was adjacent to, that Harry had grown up in, this family that existed in the kingdom of the dead and grew flowers in the dark and had just had the most significant divine political proceeding in centuries in a throne room with tapestries because the queen had insisted on tapestries and the king had eventually admitted that they were an improvement. I need time, Harry said. Not forever. But time that's actually mine, without Thanatos engineering and without Voldemort's fragment making every choice feel like it has an audience. He looked at Thanatos. The fragment comes out first. Voldemort's Horcruxes get dealt with. The immediate threat gets removed. And then, the question of what I become is mine to answer on my own terms. Thanatos said, the fragment extraction is dangerous. I know. If done incorrectly, it damages the soul housing it. I know. My father will oversee it. He has more experience with soul mechanics than anyone alive or dead. Harry glanced at Hades, who was already recalibrating into the problem-solving mode that Percy had learned to recognize as Hades' natural resting state when action was required. And I'll do it here. In the Underworld. Where the ambient magic supports soul integrity. He looked around the room again. The Horcruxes are a separate operation. I'll need help. You have it, Percy said. Harry looked at him. Something in the look was quieter than anything Percy had seen from him, stripped of the controlled surface, just the actual thing underneath. All of it, he said. All of it, Percy said. Obviously. Nico, from the wall, said, same. Without inflection, without drama, in the specific way of someone for whom the statement was simply a fact requiring acknowledgement. Thanatos rose from the floor. He stood in the throne room in the court of the death god he had been compressed to serve under, and he looked at Harry with the expression that Percy had first encountered in the forest clearing and hadn't been able to name and could now name. It was pride. The pride of something that had grown a person from a seed and was looking at what had grown and finding it exactly right, and the tragedy of it was that the pride was genuine. I will wait, Thanatos said. I have been patient for thousands of years. I can be patient longer. He looked at Hades. I ask for one thing. Ask, Hades said. The between-realm space. The container. Let me maintain it, empty, unsealed, just the structure. Not for souls. Not for any of the purposes I have been using it for. He paused. As a space. In case it is needed. Hades looked at him for a long moment. You believe he will come to the apotheosis. I believe he will make the right decision, Thanatos said. Whatever that is. Harry said, careful. That almost sounds humble. I contain multitudes, Thanatos said, and something shifted in his expression that might, in a being with less primordial weight, have been called wry. I am significantly older than the concept of humility. I have had time to develop some. The room's temperature normalized. The specific held breath quality of a gathering where something enormous has been said and is now settling dissolved, and what replaced it was the particular atmosphere of a space where people are about to do practical things. The soul extraction was scheduled for the following morning. Percy spent the rest of the day in the Underworld, which was not something he had planned and was, he found, entirely different from what he had expected. Harry showed him around with the ease of a person on home ground, the gardens, the Styx, the fields of Asphodel, the border of Elysium. He showed Percy where he used to sit as a child, the specific rock at the edge of the Styx, and Percy sat on it and looked at the black water and felt it respond to his awareness the way all water responded to him, a faint recognition. "It knows you're here," Harry said. "Yeah." Percy watched the current. "Does it bother you?" "The water sense." "Me being a son of Poseidon and your dad being..." "No," Harry said. It was fast and genuine. "My father and your father have a complicated relationship. We are not our father's relationship." Percy thought about that. "That's surprisingly well adjusted. I was raised by the queen of the Underworld. She's been navigating the complicated relationship between Hades and his brothers for millennia. It rubs off." Harry sat beside him on the rock, in the position Percy recognized from the description of the childhood habit. "Boots on this time." "Percy. The Horcruxes." "We need a list," Percy said. "I've been building one. From the fragments information, the thing about carrying a piece of someone's soul is that it leaks. Impressions. Not coherent thoughts, but images, feelings, the shapes of things that mattered to the person." He looked at the water. "I know where at least 4 of them are. There are 7 total, 6 remaining, with the scar fragment being the 7th. After tomorrow, 6. 6 objects, across, where? Britain, mostly. Albania. Possibly one that's moved." He pulled out a folded paper, not the cipher map, a different one, working notes. "A diary that was destroyed years ago, that one's already gone. A ring, which was hidden near the Gaunt family's old home in Little Hangleton. A locket, which was stolen from a cave. A cup, which is in Gringotts. A diadem, which is in Hogwarts itself." He paused. "And a snake." Percy looked at him. "A living snake. A very large living snake that Voldemort has been using as a vessel and familiar and apparently also turned into a Horcrux at some point." He folded the paper. "She's in Britain. Moving. She'll be hard to track." "We track the fragment's echoes," Percy said. "Now that you've identified the leaking, can you feel the others?" Harry went still in the considering way. "Not directly. But after tomorrow, when the fragment is removed and I'm not carrying interference from it, I might be able to feel the absence where they are. The way you felt the missing souls as absences in the accounting." He looked at Percy. "Death magic reads what isn't there as clearly as what is." "That's useful," Percy said. "Sometimes." He looked at the sticks again. The current moved its strange sideways way, and Percy watched it and thought about how every body of water he'd ever encountered moved the way water moved, forward, always forward, downhill, toward the sea. The sticks moved sideways. As if it was perpetually looking at something from the corner of its eye. "Percy." "Yeah. When this is over, the Horcruxes, Voldemort, the question of Thanatos," he stopped. "What?" Harry said, without looking at him, "I have never had a brother before." Percy said, "Me neither." He looked at the black water. "I had Tyson. He's a Cyclops, Poseidon's son, technically a half-brother. He smiled a little. He's Tyson. It's different." He paused. "But yeah. This is also different." "I don't know what it looks like," Harry said. "After. If things go the way they should. You're in the demigod world and I'm in," he gestured vaguely at the underworld around them. "This. And potentially more of this, depending. I've been in worse places than the underworld," Percy said. "I'll visit." "The squid was a promising start," Harry said. "The squid was genuinely friendly," Percy said. "That was a good squid." Somewhere behind them, further up the palace path, they could hear Persephone talking to one of the palace staff about arrangements for the following morning, her voice carrying the specific combination of organization and worry that was her particular mode of love in action. Somewhere in the throne room, Hades and Thanatos were having a conversation that Percy suspected had been coming for a very long time. And in the asphodel fields, 17 souls were back where they belonged, settled into the grey contentment of their afterlives, unaware that their brief absence had been the thread that pulled an entire divine conspiracy into the light. The morning came the way mornings came in the underworld, not with light, because there was no sun, but with a specific shift in the kingdom's ambient quality, a change in the weight of the dark, a settling that Percy had come to associate with underworld dawn. He had slept in a guest chamber that the palace produced with considerable quality, and he'd woken early and gone to find Harry, who had not slept in the night's conventional sense but had been sitting in the garden since what Nico estimated was about 3 in the morning. "Did you sleep?" Percy asked. "Some," Harry said, which Percy had already decided meant no. "The thing you said about Thanatos making you feel, studied. Like being loved in a wrong way." Percy sat in the garden, among the dark roses and the asphodels, in the pale light that the garden produced independently of any sun. "Do you still feel that now?" Harry thought about it. "No," he said. "Now that I know what it is, now that it's named, it's different." He looked at his hands. I don't forgive what he did. The extractions. The engineering. All of it." He paused. "But I understand it. And I can't make it into something simple just because simple would be easier to feel." "You're very good at not making things simple." "I was raised in the most complicated place in existence," Harry said. "Everything down here is nuanced. The dead are nuanced. You'd think death would be clean, final, simple, done. It's not. It's the most complicated thing there is." He looked up at the dark garden ceiling. "Every person who arrives here carries the full weight of everything they were. All the contradictions. All the things they meant to do and didn't. All the love and the failure of love. It doesn't simplify when you die. You just stop being able to change it." He was quiet for a moment. "Thanatos isn't wrong about the system being imperfect. He's not wrong about the grey fields having people who deserved better. He's not wrong about any of the things he's not wrong about." A pause. "And what he did was still wrong." "Yeah," Percy said. "Both things can be true," Harry said. "Yeah," Percy said again. "That's the part that's hard." The extraction happened in the deep training chambers beneath the palace, in the oldest space in the kingdom. Hades performed it himself, which was the appropriate choice in every sense, technically, because soul mechanics were his domain and his expertise, and symbolically, because it was the king of the dead personally reaching into his son's soul and removing an uninvited piece of someone else's darkness, which was the kind of action that had weight whether or not anyone was watching. Percy stood near the wall with Nico and Persephone. Harry sat in the center of the chamber on a chair that had no ceremony to it, just a chair, practical and plain, which was Harry's preference made physical. "You'll feel it," Hades said. He was standing before Harry, and the calm he projected was the specific calm of complete competence, the calm of someone who had done difficult things 10,000 times and found the difficulty no reason for drama. "The fragment is lodged in the scar's magical signature. I'll work from the outside inward. Tell me if it becomes painful." "It won't," Harry said. "Tell me if it does anyway," Hades said. He worked for 40 minutes. Percy watched and understood perhaps 20% of what he was seeing, the rest was operating in a register of divine and death magic that was well outside his expertise. What he could see was, Harry sitting completely still, Hades working with his hands in gestures that left traces in the air, and the scar on Harry's forehead doing something that Percy's demigod senses registered as deeply wrong trying to become right. The fragment resisted. Percy felt it resist, felt the angry, desperate quality of something that had been in a host for 17 years and was being removed from the warmth of it, something that wanted very badly to stay. Hades removed it anyway. When it came out, it had a color, a dark, bruised purple that was entirely wrong in the underworld's ambient light, and it made a sound that Percy heard with his soul rather than his ears, a sound like something trying to speak and failing, and then Hades closed his hands around it and said one word in a language so old Percy felt it in his teeth rather than hearing it, and the fragment was gone. Harry let out a long breath. Well, he said, in a voice that was the same as always except for something underneath it that was new, a specific quality of clear, of space where something had been pressing for 17 years and suddenly wasn't. That's better. Percy watched his face. The scar was still there, the lightning bolt shape, pale against his forehead, but the air around it was just air. Normal temperature. No wrongness. Persephone crossed the chamber quickly and Percy didn't watch what happened because it was private. Nico looked at the ceiling. Percy looked at the floor. Hades stood with his hands at his sides in the center of the chamber, and Percy looked at him, and what was on the god's face was the specific expression of someone who had just done something that required the full weight of everything they were, and was now allowing themselves to feel the cost of it in a space where only the relevant people could see. Percy looked away from that too. Some things deserved their privacy regardless of how much you respected them. After, they sat in the garden again, all of them, which was not something that had been planned but had happened naturally, the 5 of them and the dark flowers and the specific quiet of the Underworld's perpetual evening. Hades sat on a garden bench which was not something Percy had anticipated ever seeing but which somehow looked, on Hades, like a deliberate choice rather than a concession. Persephone had brought tea, which Percy also hadn't anticipated, but which turned out to be extraordinary, something dark and warm and slightly sweet that he couldn't identify but suspected involved ingredients specific to the Underworld's unique flora. Thanatos was not there. He had left after the throne room proceeding, returned to the between-realm space, waiting as he'd said he would. The Horcruxes, Harry said, setting down his tea. He was looking better than he had in weeks. The specific tired quality had not fully lifted, the investigation still sat on him, the weight of everything that had been built around him, but underneath it was something clearer. A signal without interference. The ring first. It's in Little Hangleton. It's also cursed, powerful dark curse, designed to kill anyone who touches it. Can you detect the curse before contact? Percy asked. Yes. The death magic reads it clearly. He looked at Hades. I'll need a way to contain the destruction so the soul fragment inside the Horcrux can be properly released to the Underworld. If we just destroy the object, the fragment disperses improperly, Hades said. Yes. We'll establish a Underworld passage point near each location. I'll have the soul-receiving infrastructure ready. He said this with the same quality he used to discuss administrative logistics, which was probably how you stayed sane governing the dead for millennia. You treated even the extraordinary as a matter requiring proper procedure. Nico, you'll open the passages. On it, Nico said. The locket is more complicated, Harry continued. It was stolen from a cave with extensive dark enchantments and a lake that, he paused. Looked at Percy. The lake has inferi in it. Percy said, what are inferi? Dead bodies that have been animated by dark magic and commanded to defend the lake, Harry said. Percy thought about this. Animated dead bodies in a lake. Yes. Percy looked at his hands. Then at Harry. Can your death magic stop them? In principle, yes. I command dead things. Inferi are dead things. He paused. I've never done it at scale. In an enclosed space. While also managing the locket retrieval. You command them, Percy said slowly. I control the water. Harry looked at him. I stopped the inferi from being in the lake by removing the water therein, Percy said. You command whatever's left. A pause. That's not subtle. No, Percy agreed. But Annabeth always says that sometimes the most elegant solution is the direct one. Annabeth says that after she's exhausted every indirect option, Harry said. Well, we have a lake full of animated corpses. I think we've earned direct. Percy picked up his tea. What about the cup? Gringotts. Dragon, Harry said. Percy blinked. The cup is a dragon. There's a dragon guarding the vault, Harry said patiently. The cup is in the vault. Oh. Percy drank his tea. That's different. he thought. Can your dad, Gringotts is neutral ground, Hades said. Divine jurisdiction doesn't extend to the goblin banks. It never has. That's part of the treaty. He paused. However, the dragon is suffering. Everyone looked at him. The Gringotts dragons are kept in conditions that cause chronic sensory damage, Hades said. I am aware of this because I receive the ones that die in confinement. It has been an ongoing record. He said it with the contained distaste of someone who found the practice morally unacceptable and was dealing with it through the only lens available to the god of the dead, the accounting of its consequences. If someone were to alleviate the dragon's suffering, it would potentially be receptive. You want us to help the dragon, Percy said. I want you to consider the dragon's situation, Hades said, with precise diplomatic neutrality. Percy looked at Harry. Harry looked at Percy. Nico, from across the garden, said quietly, the dragon's name is partially recorded in the Underworld's accounts under the section for beings of unusual sensitivity. Her name is approximately, it's in Draconic, but the closest translation is, Clearwater. The dragon has a name, Percy said. Everything has a name, Hades said. Some things have had their names ignored longer than others. Percy thought about the giant squid in the Hogwarts lake and the small wave he'd given it and the way it had responded. He thought about water and the things that lived in it and the way his father's domain was full of beings that humans ignored until they needed to be afraid of them. We help the dragon, Percy said. And then we get the cup. The diadem is in Hogwarts, Harry said. I can feel where it is now, the fragment interference is gone and the other Horcruxes are coming in clearer. There's a room in Hogwarts called the Room of Hidden Things. It's the same room as the Room of Requirement but in the mode where it stores everything that's ever been hidden there. The diadem is in it. Has been for years. He paused. The snake is harder. The snake, Percy said. I'll feel her when I'm close enough. She moves with Voldemort's partial presence. The pieces of him that are scattered across his remaining Horcruxes have a collective orientation, they all pull slightly toward each other. The snake will be pulling toward where Voldemort is thickest. He looked at the dark garden. I think she's in Britain. I think when the other Horcruxes start to be destroyed, he'll know it. He'll call her back. So the snake comes last, Percy said. The snake comes last, Harry confirmed. When he's already destabilized. When the other fragments have been released. He looked at Percy steadily. And then we find Voldemort himself. He's a fragment, Percy said. Not a full soul. He's enough of one, Harry said. He's been sustaining himself for 16 years. He has enough coherence to act, to possess, to seek reconstitution. He needs to be passed through the Underworld. He paused. Properly. Finally. My father will judge him as he judges everyone. Hades said, he will not enjoy that. No, Harry said. He won't. The garden held them for a while, the Underworld's version of a planning dinner, which was tea and dark flowers while a king and a prince and a son of the sea and 2 children of Hades planned the systematic dismantling of a dark wizard's efforts to avoid the most inevitable thing in existence. The conversation moved through logistics and contingencies and the specific tactical questions that arose when your opposition was a scattered soul with the motivation of someone who had been running from death for 40 years. At one point, Persephone said, I'll speak to Hecate. She has knowledge of the curse on the ring that may be useful. Hades said, Hecate will want to be involved. Hecate can be involved in a consulting capacity, Persephone said, in the specific tone she used when the decision had already been made. She'll want more than consulting, Hades said. She will get consulting and she will be grateful for it, Persephone said pleasantly. Percy watched Hades decide not to argue this. It was, Percy thought, one of the more illuminating things he'd seen in the Underworld, a god who could silence rivers with a word choosing, clearly and without resentment, to let this particular thing go. That wasn't defeat. That was the specific choice that people who actually respected each other made about things that weren't worth the fight. He thought about Annabeth and felt the familiar warmth of it. Harry was looking at the garden ceiling again, in the posture Percy had learned to associate with him, processing something in the background while present to the conversation in the foreground. After a moment he said, "Thanatos." Everyone looked at him. "I'm not making a decision about the apotheosis until Voldemort is dealt with and the Horcruxes are gone and things are resolved," he said. "That's not a no. That's not a yes. That's, I need the choice to be actually mine before I make it." He looked at Hades. "But I want your honest assessment. Not as my father, as the god who has run this kingdom for millennia and knows what the gaps are. Do you believe the system needs what Thanatos is describing?" The question sat in the garden for a moment. Hades said, "Yes." The word was precise and total and offered without qualification or comfort. "The gaps are real," he said. "The grey fields have people who deserved better. The accounting misses things. The bureaucracy of death is the oldest bureaucracy in existence and it has all the problems that implies." He held his son's gaze. "I have been the best god I know how to be in this role. I am not certain that is enough." A pause. "I am not certain that you becoming what Thanatos intends is the right solution. I am certain that the problem it purports to solve is real." Harry nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Hades said. And that was all that needed to be said about it, for now. Later that evening, Percy found Nico in one of the palace corridors, leaning against the wall in the dark with his hands in his jacket pockets and his expression doing the specific thing it did when he was thinking about something privately and had been for a while. "You okay?" Percy asked. Nico looked at him. "Harry's going to do it," he said. "The apotheosis. Eventually." Percy said, "You think?" "I know him," Nico said. "Not the way you know him, you know who he is in crisis, which is an important way. I know who he is at 4 in the morning in the garden when there's nothing at stake." He paused. "He's been trying to fix the grey field since he was 8 years old. He used to plant things in Asphodel. Did he tell you that?" He mentioned it. He planted things in Asphodel and they grew because he wanted them to, and every time one grew he'd bring a shade over and show them and they'd look at this color in the grey field and something would happen in them, they'd remember something about their actual life, about what the color meant. For a moment the grey wasn't grey. Nico looked at the corridor wall. "He's been trying to fix it since he was 8. Thanatos didn't create that impulse. He just found it," Percy said. "Yeah." Nico pushed off the wall. "He'll do it. And I think it'll be okay. Whatever it means." He looked at Percy. "I think it'll be okay because he'll still be Harry. And you'll make sure of that." Percy thought about the lava wall and the fire and the forest clearing and the garden and 17 souls going back where they belonged. "Yeah," he said. "I will." Chapter 6, What the Dead Remember. They started with the ring. Little Hangleton was the kind of village that had the specific quality of a place where something had gone deeply wrong a long time ago and the wrongness had never quite left. Percy felt it when they arrived, not his usual water sense but something adjacent to it, the awareness of a place that had been touched by divine attention of the wrong kind, the way a room felt after an argument even once the people had gone. The gaunt house sat at the edge of the village in a state of collapse that went beyond age, the kind of structural failure that happened when the thing holding a building up wasn't just mortar and wood but also the will of whoever lived in it, and that will had long since gone sour and then gone entirely. Harry walked toward it without hesitation. Percy walked beside him. "You feel the curse?" Percy asked. "From here," Harry said. "It's old. Very old. Dark family magic layered over a much older dark enchantment." He looked at the collapsed structure. "The ring is inside what used to be the main room. The curse is designed to be irresistible, it makes whoever touches the ring want to use it, and using it is what kills you." He paused. It killed someone recently. Within the last few years. I can feel the echo. Who? Someone who wanted to undo death, Harry said. Someone who put on a ring that promised they could see their dead family again. He said it without judgment. Without distance, either, with the specific quality he had when talking about the dead, the way he made room for the weight of what a life had been without being crushed by it. They should have known better and they didn't because the ring is very good at finding the part of you that wants to believe. He stopped 10 feet from the door. He raised one hand and Percy watched the air in front of them change, not visibly, not dramatically, just a quality of attention gathering, the way shadow gathered in corners without anyone moving the light. Harry read the curse the way his father had taught him to read death, from the outside in, comprehensive, without touching until the map was complete. There, he said. He moved. Percy had been watching Harry work for weeks now and was still not entirely used to the economy of it, no wasted motion, no excess, the specific efficiency of someone who had been trained to work at the scale of death and had learned that precision was more important than force because force without precision at that scale had consequences that couldn't be walked back. He didn't touch the ring. He reached the space around it and did something that Percy perceived as a pulling inward, a gathering of the curse's intention away from the ring's surface, containing it in a bubble of death magic that held the curse's logic, touch this and die, and then simply held it, suspended, unable to complete itself because the death the curse promised had been intercepted by something that governed death and didn't feel like cooperating. Then he reached in and picked up the ring. Percy let out a breath. Harry looked at the ring in his palm, a black stone, cracked, set in gold, old in a way that had accumulated significance rather than just age. He looked at it the way he looked at everything that mattered, completely, without looking away. There's a soul fragment in it, he said. Small. Damaged. The crack in the stone, he closed his hand. It wants to reconstitute with the others. I can feel the pull. Don't let it, Percy said. I'm not. Harry looked toward the ground, the specific look of downward intention that Percy had come to associate with underworld communication. Nico. The passage opened in the earth 3 feet away, the specific quality of Nico's shadow work, the clean dark edge of it, a door into the underworld's receiving infrastructure that Hades had prepared. Harry held the ring over the passage and said something in the old language that Percy felt rather than heard, and the crack in the stone opened further, and what came out was not quite visible but was entirely perceptible, something dark and small and wrong, pulled from the ring into the passage and gone. The ring went still in his hand. The gold was just gold. The stone was just a cracked stone. First one, Percy said. 5 to go, Harry said. He handed the ring to Percy, who took it carefully even though Harry had told him 3 times the curse was contained. Keep it. We'll leave them with my father at the end. They destroyed the locket in the cave on a Thursday, which was 2 weeks after the ring and 1 week after Harry had traced the locket's location through the pulling toward each other quality of the remaining fragments. The cave had the specific architecture of a place that had been designed by someone who expected visitors and wanted those visitors to regret coming, narrow entrance, a dark sea inside, the boat that moved itself, the island with the basin. And the lake full of inferi. How many? Percy asked, looking at the dark water. Harry had his eyes closed, reading the lake with his death sense. Hundreds, he said. Old. Most of them have been here for decades. They're not aware in any way that matters. They're just instruction. Move. Attack. Defend. Okay, Percy said. He looked at the lake. He felt the water, felt it the way he always felt water, the immediate awareness of it, the knowing of its depth and current and the content was exactly what Harry had said, hundreds of dead things waiting in the cold dark. Give me a moment. He stretched his awareness into the water. The inferi were in it the way sediment was in it, present, heavy, distributed. He could feel each one as a disruption in the water's natural movement, the specific wrongness of dead weight in a living medium. He moved the lake. Not dramatically, he wasn't trying to impress anyone, and the cave's ceiling had limits. He moved it the way you moved water when you knew what you were doing, with purpose and precision, pushing it outward from the island in a controlled displacement that took the inferi with it and held them against the cave walls in a controlled press of water, contained, unable to reach the island. They moved. They reached. They found nothing to reach for. Now, Percy said. Harry walked to the basin. He read the enchantments around it the same way he'd read the ring's curse, from the outside in, comprehensive, and then he did something Percy had not seen him do before. He pulled the liquid in the basin without touching it, using the death magic's claim on things that were dead and wrong to move it sideways until the basin was empty and the locket sat at the bottom. He took the locket. He said the word. The passage opened. The fragment released. The locket went still. The inferi, Harry said, turning to look at the cave walls where Percy was holding hundreds of animated corpses in a press of controlled water. His expression had the quality it always had around the dead, present, careful, the look of someone who took the weight of it seriously. What do you want to do with them? Percy asked. Harry looked at the inferi, at the hundreds of bodies, people once, accumulated here through years of dark enchantment, pressed against stone by Percy's controlled water. He said, release them. Into the lake. Into the underworld, Harry said. He turned to Percy. They've been here long enough. Whatever they were before this, they deserve to be somewhere other than a dark cave. Percy watched him. Harry extended the passage, not a small door this time, a wider opening in the floor of the cave island, and he spoke again in the old language, and what happened to the inferi in the lake was gentle in a way that their existence in that lake had not been. They stilled. They released. One by one and then in groups and then all at once, the dead things in the water went properly dead, going through the passage that waited for them with the specific ease of things that had been held in the wrong place for a very long time and were finally being allowed to go. The lake was just a lake after. Percy released the water and it settled back into its natural patterns, and the cave was quiet, and the dark water moved without obstruction, and Harry stood on the island and looked at the empty lake with an expression that Percy understood, after months of knowing him, to be what Harry looked like when something had been done right. You planted things in Asphodel at age 8, Percy said. Harry looked at him. Nico told you. Is it true? Yes. Were they nice plants? Harry's mouth moved in a specific way that meant he was fighting the smile. They were excellent plants, he said. They went to Gringotts on a Wednesday, which was Annabeth's idea. She had joined them by that point, port-keying into Britain with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for permission to be involved and was now fully involved. She had done the research on Gringotts the way she did all research, which was to say completely, and had 3 plans arranged in order of preference with contingencies for each. Plan A involved speaking to the goblin in charge of the relevant vault directly and honestly, which Annabeth thought was worth attempting because goblins respected directness and because honesty about divine involvement in their bank was, she argued, the kind of information that goblin politics found actionable. It almost worked. They got to the head goblin, whose name was Ragnarok and whose expression upon learning that the prince of the underworld was standing in his bank was the expression of someone rapidly updating several simultaneous professional assessments. He was not, it turned out, entirely unaware of the Horcrux in his vault. Goblins, he informed them with dry professional irritation, had detected the wrongness of it 40 years ago and had been debating internally what to do about it ever since, the debate centering primarily on the legal and financial complications of the vault's owner being a Dark Lord who was technically dead but apparently not entirely. We will remove the fragment, Harry said. The soul portion releases to the underworld. The cup, the object, is yours. We have no interest in the cup. Ragnarok looked at him for a long time. At Percy. At Annabeth, who was the only person in the room looking at the bank's architecture rather than the goblin, which was either rude or respectful depending on which culture you were applying. The dragon, Ragnarok said. Harry looked at him. What about her? She is unwell, Ragnarok said, and said it with the specific flatness of someone who had been saying this internally for a long time and was now saying it to someone who might be able to do something about it. The arrangement predates my tenure. The conditions are, they are what they are. She has been used as a security measure for too long, Harry said. Too long, Ragnar agreed. They went to the dragon together. Clearwater, because Nico had said it was her name and Harry had decided to use it, was enormous and pale and had the specific quality that Harry's death sense described to Percy afterward as chronic pain made into a life, the way something lived in a body that hurt all the time and had reorganized itself around the hurt until the hurt was the only shape it knew. She was blind from the years in the dark, her senses so assaulted by the bank's noise and light that she developed layers of sensory armor that served as walls rather than protection. Harry walked up to her alone. Percy watched from the passage entrance with Annabeth, who had stopped looking at the architecture and was watching Harry with the specific focused attention she used when something important was being done that she wanted to fully observe and understand. Harry stood in front of the dragon and was very still. Not performing stillness, actually still, the kind that came from genuinely having nowhere else to be and no urgency about the being there. He put one hand out, not touching, the same gesture Percy had seen him use over crime scenes and over the lake and over everything he approached with his death sense, feeling from the outside before making contact. Then he spoke. Not in the old language and not in any language Percy recognized, in something that had no linguistic structure, just quality, the way you spoke to something that didn't use language when you wanted it to know you were not a threat. Something between tone and intention. Clearwater turned toward him. Not aggressively. Slowly. The way something turns toward warmth. Harry put his hand against her nose, and the dragon made a sound that Percy had no frame of reference for and which Annabeth would describe later as the sound that something large made when it had been afraid for years and had suddenly encountered something it wasn't afraid of. He's going to free her, isn't he? Annabeth said quietly. Yeah, Percy said. That's not in any of my plans. No, Percy said. He makes his own. It took 2 hours, the dragon, the vault, the cup. The cup released its fragment cleanly, more cleanly than the others, as if this piece of soul had been less carefully tended and was more ready to go. Ragnar received the soul's release with the professional gravity of someone witnessing a significant event and choosing to record it correctly. The dragon left through the bank's roof, which was not structurally designed for that purpose but which proved, under the circumstances, to be adequate. She flew north, because Harry had said north, because north was where the highlands began and the spaces between human habitation grew wide enough for something her size to find room. Ragnar looked at the hole in his ceiling for a long moment. The cup, Harry said. And our passage out. The cup, Ragnar said, and 2 galleons each for structural repair. He looked at Percy. The sea god's son breaks things. To be fair, Percy said, I didn't touch the ceiling. Dragons break things, Ragnar said, and you brought the dragon into it. Percy paid for the ceiling. The diadem was in the room of hidden things at Hogwarts, which they returned to on a grey Saturday in January. The room, in its hidden things mode, was unlike the room of requirement, vast, labyrinthine, full of centuries of discarded and forgotten objects stacked in configurations that would have been alarming to any structural engineer. The diadem sat on a bust of a long-dead headmaster near the back of the room, glowing faintly with the wrong kind of light. Harry walked through the room the way he walked through the Underworld, with the awareness of someone who could feel every significant thing in a space and navigate by significance. He went directly to the diadem, picked it up, spoke the word, released the fragment. Simple. Efficient. 4 done. 2 to go. Voldemort will know, Harry said, coming back through the room stacks. The fragments are all pulling toward each other and they've all been going quiet one by one. He'll know someone is systematically destroying them. He'll call the snake, Percy said. He'll call the snake, Harry agreed. They waited. It took 4 days. Harry felt the snake's movement change on the 4th day, the specific alteration in the fragment pull that meant the snake was being directed somewhere rather than moving freely. He tracked it through the afternoon, a feeling that Percy could only understand through the analogy Harry gave him, like following a current underwater by feel rather than by sight, sensing the direction of flow rather than seeing the water. She was coming to Scotland. She was coming to Hogwarts. "He's here," Harry said, on the evening of the fourth day. He was standing in the entrance hall of the castle with Percy and Annabeth and Nico, and what he felt, what Percy could see him feeling through the quality of his expression, the way his death sense went from active to completely comprehensive, a flooding rather than a focus, was enormous and wrong and very close. "All the fragments," Harry said. "The reconstitution. He's trying to do it here. Tonight. He stopped. He has a body. A partial body. Someone who was helping him, where?" Percy said. "Great Hall," Harry said. They moved. The Great Hall was not the Great Hall they had eaten in every day, the enchanted ceiling, the house tables, the warm particular quality of a room used daily by hundreds of people for ordinary things. It was the Great Hall at night with every torch extinguished and something enormous and wrong gathered at its center, and what stood there was the answer to what a man looked like when he had spent decades refusing death and the refusal had cost him everything that made him human and he hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. Voldemort. Not the monstrous form of popular imagination, worse than that in a more specific way, the wrongness of something that had been human and had hollowed itself out through terrible choices until the humanity was just a frame that the choices lived in. He was thin and pale and red-eyed and he stood in the great hall of Hogwarts with his snake coiled around his feet and the remaining fragment of soul gathered into him from the Horcruxes and the scar, and he was looking at Harry the way something looked at the specific thing it had been seeking for 16 years. "Harry Potter," he said. "Voldemort," Harry said. Percy had been in fights. He had fought titans and giants and primordial beings and Tartarus itself. He had a calibrated sense of danger and a calibrated sense of what he could do about it. He put himself slightly forward and to Harry's left and summoned Riptide into his hand without the theatrical gesture, just the thought and the weight of the blade appearing. Voldemort's red eyes moved to Percy. "A demigod," he said. "Interesting company for the boy who lived." "He goes by Harry," Percy said. "I was speaking to his history," Voldemort said. "Not to his preferences." "His history is fine," Percy said. "We're more concerned about yours." Harry said nothing. Percy could feel him beside him, the death sense spreading outward from him the way cold spread from an open freezer door, comprehensive, covering the room, finding every relevant thing in it and cataloging it. The snake. The partial soul. The fragments of reconstitution that Voldemort had gathered. "You destroyed my Horcruxes," Voldemort said to Harry. Not with anger, with the quality of someone presenting evidence in a case. Systematically. With access to the Underworld's soul mechanics and assistance from very unusual quarters. He tilted his head, and the red eyes had in them something that Percy identified with difficulty as respect. The specific, cold, reluctant respect of someone encountering a capability they'd underestimated. "You are extraordinary. I know that. I have known it since the Underworld began building you." His voice was precise and without warmth and completely sincere. "You understand that I have no quarrel with you. I have never had a quarrel with you. I had a quarrel with a prophecy and it sent me to a house in Godric's Hollow and everything that followed was cause and effect." "You killed my parents," Harry said. "I did," Voldemort said, without flinching. "And I have been paying for it for 16 years in a form that I do not recommend to anyone." He extended a hand, the wrong kind of gesture, the gesture of someone offering something rather than threatening, and Percy trusted it completely not at all. "What I am offering you now is simpler than what Thanatos is offering. Much simpler. Let me reconstitute fully. The snake, the soul gathering, it's nearly complete, the fragment I lost from your scar being the only, help me complete it. And then I will be gone from Britain and from your life entirely. I have no interest in power over the magical world anymore. I have learned what that cost." He held Harry's gaze. "I want only to live." The hall was quiet. Harry said, "I know." Something shifted in Voldemort's expression. Not hope, the calculation of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd assessed. Then you understand, I understand that you are afraid, Harry said. His voice had the quality it had in the Underworld when he talked about the dead, present, real, without condescension or false comfort. I understand that you have been afraid of death your entire life and that the fear made you make choices that cost you everything that might have made the fear bearable. I understand that you have spent 40 years running from the most inevitable thing in existence and that the running has made you less than what you started as. He looked at Voldemort directly. And I understand that none of that is a reason for you to avoid it any longer. I am not finished, Voldemort said, and for the first time something moved in his voice that wasn't calculated. Nobody thinks they are, Harry said gently. That's not how it works. He raised his wand. What happened then was not a duel in the conventional sense. Voldemort raised his own wand and what came from it was the killing curse, green light, fast, aimed with the precision of someone who had cast it 10,000 times. Percy moved to intercept and the water in every goblet and vase and damp stone in the room moved with him, a shield of displaced water that shouldn't have been able to stop a killing curse and wouldn't have stopped it alone. Harry stepped through Percy's shield from behind. He didn't dodge. He walked toward the curse, and what met it was not a counter-curse and not a shield, it was the full, open, comprehensive weight of everything Harry was. The son of the death god. The boy raised in the oldest kingdom in existence. The person who had sat at the edge of the Styx since he was 6 and watched the souls of every person who had ever lived move through a current he understood completely. Death, looking at its own weapon and finding it familiar. The curse stopped. Not rebounded, absorbed. The way a deep body of water absorbed a stone, completely, without reflection, the stone going into the water and the water closing over it and the water remaining the water. Harry kept walking. Voldemort sent a second curse and Harry walked through it the same way. A third, and Harry raised one hand and the curse bent around him the way wind bent around a mountain, not because the mountain deflected it but because the mountain was simply more mountain than the wind was wind. Stop, Voldemort said. No, Harry said. He reached Voldemort. He stood in front of him in the great hall of Hogwarts with Riptide at Percy's side and Nico at the door and Annabeth behind with the specific focused expression of someone watching something that needed to be witnessed correctly, and he reached out and put one hand on Voldemort's chest. Not a weapon gesture. Not an attack. A claiming. Voldemort's expression did something that Percy thought might be the first genuine thing it had done in years, shock, pure and unprocessed, the shock of someone who has built their entire life around fleeing something and has just discovered they've run toward it. Harry spoke in the old language. Not the word for destroying Horcruxes, something different, longer, the specific claim of death on what had been running from it for too long. Percy felt it even from across the room, the weight of it, the absolute finality. The soul fragments that Voldemort had gathered began to release. They went in pieces, not torn, not destroyed, just released, the way a clenched hand went when the clenching became impossible to sustain. The gathered reconstitution dissolved back into fragments and the fragments went through the underworld passage that Nico opened at the floor's center, one by one, Hades waiting on the other side with the accounting open and the judgment ready. Voldemort's body, without the soul fragments that had been sustaining it, stopped holding itself together with the theatrical abruptness of something that had only been a body because of extraordinary effort and now was not. What remained in the great hall was the original fragment, the damaged, desperate, hollow piece of soul that had spent 16 years trying to reconstitute and had ended up, against every desperate effort, exactly where it had been trying to avoid, at the door of the Underworld, with a son of Hades's hand on the door. Harry looked at it. At what remained of Tom Riddle after everything Tom Riddle had been willing to do to himself to avoid this. Go through, Harry said, and his voice was not triumphant and not cold and not performatively merciful. It was the voice of someone doing the correct thing at the correct time, which was all it needed to be. The fragment went through. The passage closed. The snake, Nagini, had been still throughout, which Percy had been tracking from the corner of his eye with considerable anxiety. When the last fragment passed through and the passage closed, she raised her head and did something that Percy's instincts classified as a question. She looked at Harry. Harry looked back. She was a person first, he said, to nobody in particular. Before he made her into this. She's been carrying his soul fragment for years. It's gone now. She's just a snake. He crouched and looked at her at eye level, which Percy thought was either very wise or very reckless and which, coming from Harry, was probably both. She can go north. Like the dragon. Percy opened his mouth. Scotland has space, Harry said. Scotland has sheep, Percy said. She'll manage, Harry said. The snake went north. The great hall was quiet and ordinary in the specific way of rooms after enormous things have happened, slightly stunned, the walls settling back into themselves, the enchanted ceiling returning to showing stars because the great hall's ceiling showed whatever the outside sky was doing, and outside was a clear winter night with more stars than cloud. Annabeth said, "It's done." "It's done," Harry said. He stood in the center of the great hall for a moment, and Percy watched him do the specific thing Harry did after significant events, which was to be completely present in the aftermath rather than immediately moving to the next thing. He stood there and he felt the room and he felt the absence of the fragments that had been pulling at his awareness for weeks, and he felt the Underworld's accounting settle into its complete state, the last fragments of Tom Riddle's soul passing through judgment in the proper way, the missing entry in the divine record finally filled. Then he looked at Percy. "Thank you," he said. "You did most of it," Percy said. "You paid for the ceiling at Gringotts." "I'm still a little annoyed about that," Percy said. Harry's expression did the thing where the smile that he was fighting got through anyway. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." They went to the Underworld that night. All of them, Harry, Percy, Annabeth, Nico, through the passage that Harry navigated with his eyes open and his hands easy at his sides. The Underworld received them with its perpetual grey calm and its impossible flowers and the specific quality of a place that had been undisturbed for a very long time and intended to continue being undisturbed. Persephone was in the garden. She knew they were coming, the Underworld told her the things that mattered, and she was in the dark roses with a lamp that she didn't need because she was a goddess, but which she was carrying anyway, which Percy had come to understand was the specific thing she did when she was waiting for someone she wanted to see. She saw Harry and she said nothing, and she didn't need to. Hades came out of the palace a few minutes later, which meant he'd been informed and had given them the garden first and had waited a measured and precise period of time that was long enough to be respectful and short enough to make clear he was waiting. He looked at Harry the way he always looked at Harry in unguarded moments, with everything he was, unmuted. "It's done," he said. "It's done," Harry said. "The accounting should be complete." "It is." Hades looked at him. "You were extraordinary." "You said you'd say that regardless," Harry said. "I said that too," Hades agreed. "Both things remain true." They stayed in the garden for a long time, the five of them, and then Thanatos at the garden's edge, who arrived without announcement and with the specific quality of someone who had been given permission to be present and was taking that permission carefully. He stood at the edge of the dark roses and said nothing, and Harry saw him and looked at him for a moment and then looked back at the garden. It was not forgiveness. It was not resolution. It was the specific thing Harry did with complicated truths. He held them without resolving them, made room for them, and kept moving. Percy sat between Nico and Annabeth and watched the family that existed in this dark impossible garden and felt the warmth of it even through the Underworld's perpetual cool. Annabeth leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. "What happens now?" she said quietly. He looked at Harry. At Hades and Persephone. At Thanatos at the garden's edge and the dark roses and the asphodels and the lamp that made light nobody needed. "Now he decides," Percy said. It was 3 weeks later when Harry made the decision. Percy knew it was coming the way he always knew things that were coming, through the accumulation of small signals, the quality of their mirror conversations in the days before, the specific way Harry had been sitting with the question rather than avoiding it. The question of what he became. The question Thanatos had posed in the forest clearing and the throne room, and which Harry had set aside with clean precision until the things that needed doing were done. Harry contacted him through the mirror on a Tuesday evening. Percy was at camp, sitting at the edge of the beach with the winter ocean moving quietly in the dark, which was where he went when he needed to think about things that required salt air and space. "I've decided," Harry said. Percy looked at the mirror. "Okay. I'm not doing the apotheosis," Harry said. "Not Thanatos' version. Not on his terms, not in his timeline, not using his architecture." He said it with the same quality of finality he'd used when he said it's done in the Great Hall, completely, without residue. "That's not what I'm built for. Whatever I am, however much power I have, I am not a primordial force, and I don't want to be one. I want to be the person who plants things in Asphodel and sits with the newly dead and argues with my father about procedure." He paused. "I want to be the person who has a brother." Percy said, "Okay. You're not going to argue," Harry said. "No," Percy said. "I was never going to argue about this one. I thought," Harry stopped. "I thought you'd push for it. The practical case for it. Annabeth and I talked through the structural argument for the apotheosis 3 times, and the structural argument is very good." "The structural argument is great," Percy agreed. "And it's not what I care about." He looked at the ocean. "I care about the person I ran the lava wall with. I care about the person who freed a dragon and gave a snake directions to Scotland and said 300 inferi deserved better than a dark cave." He paused. "That person doesn't need to be a primordial god to fix the grey fields. That person is going to fix the grey fields by being exactly who they are, every day, with the power they already have." He paused. "And my dad's territory and your dad's territory would have the world's most uncomfortable family dinner every time you merged with an ancient force that predates Olympus." Harry was quiet for a moment. "That's your main concern," Harry said. "The family dinner." "I have priorities," Percy said. "Percy." "Yeah. Thank you," Harry said. "For all of it." "Yeah," Percy said. "You too." The conversation with Thanatos happened in the Underworld's deep chambers, in the oldest rooms, with no audience. Harry had requested it and Thanatos had come, and what happened there was between them in a way that Percy respected by not asking about directly. What Harry told him afterward was this: Thanatos had accepted the decision. Had accepted it, Percy thought, with something that was genuinely like peace, the specific piece of something that had been pushing for a long time and had found, in the refusal, evidence of exactly the character it had been trying to build toward. The right person said no on their own terms. The right person always would. Thanatos returned to his diminished form. To his role in the divine order. But something had shifted in the arrangement, a conversation had happened, in the Underworld's parliament, between Hades and Thanatos and the larger structure, about the gaps in the system. About the grey fields. About the accounting and the failures in it. The conversation was long and ongoing and produced no immediate results, which was how divine policy conversations worked, but it was happening, and it was happening because a person had named the problem out loud in the throne room with everyone present, and the problem had refused to go away once named. The grey fields began, slowly, to change. Not because of any single decision, because Harry went back to them. Every time he was in the Underworld, every winter when Persephone came home and the kingdom settled into the specific warmth of having its queen, Harry went to the Asphodel fields and he sat with the shades who had fallen through the cracks of centuries of divine bureaucracy, and he talked with them and he listened and he brought the problem to his father's attention with the specific frequency and specificity that made ignoring it difficult. Hades, it turned out, didn't want to ignore it. Had never wanted to ignore it. Had been working within the system's constraints for millennia and had found someone who operated outside those constraints while respecting their purpose, and found it useful. A word that, from Hades, carried the weight that words carried when they were chosen with complete deliberateness. Percy visited the Underworld twice that year. Once in April, when the Hogwarts term had a break and Harry came back and Percy came down for a week, and they spent 3 days doing exactly nothing significant, sitting at the Styx, walking the fields, having dinner with Persephone, who turned out to be an extraordinary cook and who asked Percy about his mother with the specific interest of someone who respected women who raised good children under difficult circumstances. Percy answered all her questions and some of them made his throat feel strange and she refilled his plate and didn't comment, which was exactly right. Hades and Percy had one conversation, in the palace library, that Percy had not been expecting. "You care about him," Hades said. "Not a question." "Yes," Percy said. "As a brother." "Yes." Hades looked at him for a moment with those colorless eyes. "I have not been straightforward with your world. With the demigod community. With the children of my brothers." He said it with the precision of someone who had thought about how to say something for a long time and had decided the direct route was overdue. "I am aware that I have caused difficulties by withholding. By operating within my domain exclusively and leaving the broader consequences of that exclusion to be managed by others." He paused. "Harry has made me aware of this. With considerable persistence." "He's persistent," Percy agreed. "He is," Hades said, and the warmth in it was the contained kind, the kind that had been contained so long the container had become part of the expression. I do not extend this as a general reform of my character. I want to be clear about that. I remain who I am." He held Percy's gaze. "But you are his brother. That makes you an extension of my responsibility. In the way that I do not advertise but intend genuinely." He paused. "If you are ever in a position where my intervention would be relevant, I'll ask," Percy said. "I'm not great at asking for help." "Neither is he," Hades said. "You match well." Percy thought about that for a while after. The second visit was in December, which was when Persephone came back to the Underworld and the kingdom's quality shifted in a way that Percy understood better now, the specific warmth that was the warmth of completion, of the person who belonged somewhere returning to where they belonged. He brought Annabeth. She and Harry talked for 2 days about structural reforms in divine governance, soul accounting practices, and the theoretical possibility of a wizarding demigod diplomatic channel, all of which Percy understood roughly 40% of and was genuinely interested in despite this. He spent an afternoon at the Styx with Nico, not talking about anything significant. Nico had the gift of good silence, which Percy appreciated as someone who rarely shut up but occasionally needed to. "He's better," Nico said, at one point. "Yeah," Percy said. The scar being gone, Nico looked at the black water. "It's different. He's always been himself. But there was something underneath it that was always slightly braced. Like someone standing in a wind that nobody else could feel." He picked up a stone. "It's gone now." Percy thought about what it would mean to carry something in your head for 17 years that was partly someone else's fear and horror and determination to never die. To grow up with that underneath everything, and to have been formed so well, so completely, by people who loved you, that you made it through anyway. "He's going to be okay," Percy said. "Yeah," Nico said. "He was always going to be." On the last night of that December visit, they all sat in the palace's great hall for dinner, Harry and Percy and Annabeth and Nico and Persephone and Hades, at a table that was set with the specific quality of table set for people you intended to feed properly. Persephone had cooked. The food was extraordinary and impossible and probably contained things that grew only in the underworld, and that was fine. Hades made a toast. Percy had not been aware that Hades toasted things. He apparently did, once every several centuries, when the circumstances warranted it. He raised a cup of something dark and said, "To what has been completed." "And what hasn't yet," Persephone added, which was the specific amendment she made to her husband's pronouncements when she thought the frame needed widening. "And what hasn't yet," Hades agreed. They drank. Across the table, Harry caught Percy's eye. The green eyes that caught light they weren't given held something that Percy thought of as the specific expression of someone who had been given an extraordinary life, understood that they'd been given it, and was looking at the evidence of it, the people at the table, the dark garden outside, the kingdom around them that was home, with the fullness of someone who didn't need to name things to hold them. Percy raised his cup slightly. Harry raised his back. Outside, the Styx moved in its perpetual current, carrying the souls of everyone who had ever lived in its black water, going somewhere permanent and important. The asphodels in the garden were exactly as they always were, grey and still and exactly right for what they were. And in a corner of the fields, in a small section that a 17-year-old had once tended with the conviction that color belonged even in the grey places, something grew that hadn't been there a generation ago. It was small. It was not dramatic. It was exactly the kind of change that happened when someone loved a place enough to make it better without waiting for permission, and it would grow larger, slowly, over centuries, because that was how the good things grew. The dead moved through their afterlives with the ordinary permanence that was the Underworld's great gift to them. The missing souls were in their proper places. The accounting was complete and correct and ongoing. The boy who had been kept by the kingdom of the dead was sitting at a table with his family and his brother and eating dinner, and the story of how he'd gotten here was extraordinary in every particular and entirely his own. And in a space between realms that had been built for one purpose and was now empty, Thanatos waited with the patience of something older than patience, in the specific way of something that had done what it set out to do and was content to wait and see what grew from it. The lamp in the garden burned. The dark flowers bloomed. The underworld breathed.